Namaste and greetings. I, Priyanka Negi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today we're gathered here for the day 2 of the EPAYF Environment Policy and Action Youth Fellowship. We welcome you all to this immersive journey into impactful environmental policy in action. The chair for the program is Ms. Bhargavi S. Raoji, independent researcher and educator, environment activist Bengaluru, and visiting senior fellow at IMPRI. Our expert panel for the program today includes Mr. Soumya Dutta ji, Mr. Debadityo Sinha ji, and Dr. Riazul Ehsan ji. The conveners for this course are Dr. Mansi Bal Bhargav ji, Ms. Suhasini Iyer ji, Professor Utpal Kumar De ji, Dr. Simi Mehta ji, and Dr. Arjun Kumar ji. Proceeding further, we welcome everyone to this transformative journey and appreciate your dedication in investing your time, energy, and to gaining a profound understanding of the crucial role and intricate details of environmental policy and action. We have also shared course outline and reading resources in your email for your kind perusal. Before we start today's session, I would like to state the housekeeping announcements. Please join the meeting on time. There will be Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions on the Q&A box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise and refrain from making general comments in the questions to save time. To begin today's session, I would like to invite our chair, Ms. Bhargavi S. Raoji, independent researcher and educator, environment activist, Bengaluru, and visiting senior fellow at IMPRI, to kindly give her opening remarks. We welcome you, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka. And I apologize for joining a little late. My internet was giving me some issues today. Anyway, I've got it fixed. Very happy to be chairing this session again. Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon to our esteemed speakers today. I'm very happy to be chairing this session where we're going to be discussing so much more, continuing from the first session. Recalling a few thoughts from the first session, we addressed briefly about climate change and the vulnerable and the marginal groups of today, and recalling what Abhi Tamin brought to us in the context of the open natural ecosystems, the loops and gaps in the policies, particularly what he mentioned about the lack of a restoration policy in the country, followed by Mr. Tikender's talk on governance issues. And there was so much to learn from his own experience of having been a deputy mayor, and how he touched upon many aspects of, starting from the forest fires that are happening there today, and the fact that the pine trees were planted many years ago, and how we continue to make those mistakes. These are all highlights that I'm sure kept all our participants thinking for the last 1 week. And as we come to this second session, it will be wonderful to hear from our speakers today, and I will probably allow them to speak and speak a little after them after hearing, because I don't want to take away their time. So over to our speakers, and have a great session, everybody. A thought-provoking, another meaningful Saturday for all of us. Over to you, Priyanka, to hand it over to our panelists today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, I am delighted to invite Mr. Soumya Dutta ji, co-convener, South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis, SAPACC, New Delhi, and visiting senior fellow at IMPRI for his address on climate change, action, impact, and way forward. Welcome to the program, sir, and over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka, and good afternoon to all the participants, whoever is listening. This topic today is quite broad, climate change actions, impacts, and way forward. And in a sense, the actions and way forward have a lot of overlap. And going by the very brief introduction that I heard, because I was not there on the first session last Saturday. So hopefully some of the issues have been touched on briefly. So I'll try to limit my talk on impacts a little to a very brief account, and I'll limit it to most of the major impacts that India or South Asia as a whole is or are getting and are likely to get more and more as projected. Why I say South Asia? Because most of the ecological systems in South Asia are interconnected. And I like to reiterate it repeatedly again, that in South Asia, it's extremely difficult to isolate impacts and actions either in India or in Bangladesh or in Nepal or in Bhutan and Pakistan. And we have to look at it in an integrated manner, because most of the ecosystems and ecological boundaries are not actually along the political boundaries. And the three natural factors, one of the three seas, the Himalayas and the southwest monsoon, these three actually ties us together ecologically to a very large extent, very, very closely ties us together. So though we'll be talking about India, because this course is this 2 months thing is about India mostly, and people are mostly, hopefully, from India. But we'll keep it in mind that we are talking about the South Asian region, in that focusing on India. The impacts, as I said, I'll not talk too much about impacts because, as Bhargavi said, probably some of the impacts have been talked about, but I will also highlight what are the major impacts that India, South Asia and India are facing and will be facing more and more. Sitting today, it's a very easy task to look at two of the major impacts that we are having. One is the heat waves and one is the water crisis. And these two are connected. In fact, these are very old phenomena which are getting exaggerated, which are getting magnified, amplified by the impacts of climate change. And these were well projected for last 20 years, actually. But the thing is, when we are talking about heat waves, heat stress, impacts of heat waves, even if you look now, sitting in 2024 May, what the governments are doing and what people's understanding, and even in general medical understanding, doctors' understanding about heat waves and heat impacts, there is a big gap, what we see. And that needs to be addressed, because one of the major impacts is not just heat wave, but heat wave, that means temperature above normal by 5 degrees for a period, but also heat index. And this is a very important thing to understand, that the impact of just a higher temperature is far less than the impact of a combination of high temperature and high humidity. And at a much lower temperature than a heat wave, announced heat wave temperature, heat index can actually kill people. That kills more people than heat wave does. So that's one area where the actions, the impacts are there, but the actions in India have not yet picked up even to recognize it properly, to study it and to document it. There are other studies which have happened. Let me first explain why this is going to be an increasingly more important and devastating impact on India and South Asia. Today, if you look at many cities even, of course, you know that cities generally are at a warmer temperature than the neighboring village areas because of the urban heat island effect. So cities are generally 5 to 6 degrees hotter, particularly if it is a big city, a lot of concrete, steel, cement, and buildings, roads. So they are generally hotter. So one thing the people, and today there is a huge urban working class population, which are construction workers, rickshaw pullers, porters, and a whole lot of things, whole lot of people who are working on the street vendors. They are exposed to this. And if we, even today, we don't even take into account what kind of impact, what kind of people go through under what kind of situations. Here, let me also highlight one major thing, because we still depend on the India Meteorological Department, IMD, for prediction as well as measurement and announcement of heat wave days. IMD gives a criterion that 40 degree in the plains, 30 degree in the hills, plus 5 degrees, this 4.5 degrees, 4 to 5 degrees extra. So this kind of thing is given. But these do not take into account people's working places and their conditions. As I said, many places in the urban areas, as well as in the rural areas, but let me first talk about urban areas, because in these cases, the situation gets even worse. The condition that people are working in are actually very different from what the IMD has stated from their meteorological station situated at a very different location in the city. And there are very few cities where large number of stations are located. Only some major metropolitan cities have large number of stations distributed, but most other cities, towns, and villages, they have cities and town. They have either 2 or 3 meteorological stations, or even one. And major part of the city where the people are working in a very different kind of condition might be at a much higher temperature, might be at a much higher humidity. So this kind of might be at a much less circulated space. That is, the wind speed and ventilation is much less. So these are a major difference, and that should indicate to a major area in policy action, policy level action, which is not existing today, which needs a higher attention. I'm repeating this point again to be clear that where people work physically is not, those places are not probably in exact climatic situation as the IMD or India Meteorological Department is giving for that time or that day in that city. So there comes a question of whether there has to be a policy level and action plan level uh, implementation on getting people to monitor and understand their own climatic condition, where they are working, at what point of time they are working, both in time and space. So that's one important thing which is completely lacking in Indian climate action response, climate response scenario, which is either adaptation or resilience building, which comes under adaptation and resilience building, but which is very largely absent. The second area that is absent, as I said, we have forecasts on heat waves, but the projections, if you see, and this is because of the peculiar nature of the heat day temperature curve, when the maximum temperature comes, and the curve that if you look at, with a very little shift towards the higher temperature, it a minor shift, which is roughly half a degree, 2.75 degree, the number of heat wave days, which is the area under shaded area under the curve, actually gets very large. That means with a very little increase in average temperature or day temperatures in the maximum day temperatures in the season, the number of heat wave days goes increasing at a much faster rate. So projections have been shown that by the year 2050, it's likely that the number of heat wave days in India will be increasing by anything between 6 to 8 times, not 6 to 8%, not 60 to 80%, but 6 to 8 times. That means 600 to 800%. And that's a massive increase for which we have no cognition at this point, and no plans do exist to take care of that. So that's the second point. The third point, as I said, which I will explain a little bit, the question of simultaneously high temperature and high humidity. These are very severe impacts that the South Asian population, along with Indian population, of course, is getting impacted, except in the mountainous and sub-Himalayan areas. The rest of the areas, they are getting impacted. And this is not being taken care of in either the policy sphere or in the action sphere in any reasonable manner. So the problem is the heat index, which often also is measured by the wet bulb temperature, says a very different thing from the IMD heat wave announcements and advisories. The IMD, as I said, 40 degrees plus, 30 degrees plus, but the science, the medical science very clearly says that if the wet bulb temperature is 35 degrees, one must not work unprotected and uncooled. That means if you work in that condition without cooling, you might even die. And these are established science, because the hypothalamus here in the brain, so which controls the temperature, that starts failing. And once that fails, you are unable to control. And the reason is, for a high humidity, our body's primary mechanism of cooling is perspiration. And for a high humidity, your body don't cool by perspiration. So even the IMD advisory that, or the government advisory that you drink enough water actually don't work for a high temperature, high humidity combination. That's why this heat index is called a killer combination. So we need to understand that, we need to initiate measurements of that, and we need to put in place action plans which should be part of the city level heat action plans, which understands and take care of all these factors. So these three are very important in the heat related impact scenario. And let me finish this section by saying that the projections are: one, in the Gangetic Basin, where something like 40 to 50 crore people live, the entire Gangetic Basin, plus a little more than that, and the peninsular India, major part of peninsular India, we are going to face every year in a couple of decades, maybe even less, we are going to face maybe 20 to 30 days every year where conditions will be completely unsuitable for uncooled, unprotected outdoor work, physical work. One working in an air conditioned room, inside a room, that's fine. But small farmers, farm workers, rickshaw pullers, street vendors, construction workers, porters, traffic policemen, everyone of this sort, if they are working in those kind of condition, they are likely to be seriously ill or even die. So that kind of situation is developing because along with the heat, the humidity is also increasing, and that's a very simple physical relationship. Every degree Celsius or centigrade, as it is called normally, if the air temperature rises by 1 degree centigrade, there is 7% more moisture that the air can hold. And as you have seen, over the last couple of years, the sea surface temperatures have gone up drastically. So with our peninsular India and the river valleys, river basins, with a lot of moisture available, the temperature rises, along with the relative humidity rises. And if this combination goes beyond 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperature, it becomes even fatal condition for physical workers. So that's a major threat for India. The second major threat which we are facing, which is connected with water also, is a likely impact, very large impact on our food production systems. If you recollect, I am fond of recollecting this because in the recent memory, that is one major impact on food production systems, but there are many others. If you recollect 2022, till February, mid-February, the wheat production was forecasted to be a bumper production. Even the Ministry of Agriculture and its secretary said so. Farmers were very happy. From late February to March and late April, three major heat waves came. Wheat production crashed because at the grain formation stage, if the night time, particularly the nighttime temperature is a little higher than normal, even 1.5 degree higher than normal, which is happening even this year. Of course, this year it is happening a little late. In 2022, it happened a little earlier. So if that night temperature is higher, grain do not form in larger size, and the amount of premium that is have is much less. So even if you have production, it's much less production, much less value production, because the grain size is small and it's not as much food there as it used to be. So the grain production, wheat production crashed. India had to ban wheat production, wheat exports. 18 other countries which depend on India's wheat import, they were impacted. And this is going on not only in India, this is going on across. Similarly, because of this extra moisture in the air, which will be going up because the temperature will be going up, which is going up because the temperature is higher, there will be heavier rainfalls in some areas. Whenever the air, as the moisture gets up, it gets cool, it has to come down somewhere. Where it comes down, because there is so much more, if there is 2 degrees Celsius extra, which is normal, you have almost 14 to 15% extra moisture. So it has to drop down somewhere in a big outpour. And that will be heavy rain and flooding. And this is happening regularly. If you are looking at newspapers or other news portals, you'll see right now Afghanistan is facing a severe flood. Right now, Europe, large areas of Europe are facing a severe flood. Just a few weeks ago, Europe faced a severe heat wave. And even now, even in India now, we are facing a severe heat wave in large parts of the country. So these two are connected. And that points to another important area, that because of the climate system getting disrupted, the biggest impact has been on the hydrological cycle. There are multiple cycles, phosphorus cycle, nitrogen cycle, many others are there, the carbon cycle. But the biggest impact, because of the change in the carbon cycle, the biggest climate impact has been through the hydrological cycle. And that has been manifested in all of this: extreme floods, extreme rainfall, droughts, this kind of higher temperature. So temperature is in the carbon due to the carbon cycle, but all the other impacts are happening through the hydrological cycle or the water cycle. One other impact that has happened in the hydrological cycle is because the peninsular India and also some part of the a little bit central and north India, they are impacted, particularly in the coastal region. They are impacted by the coastal storms, basically the severe tropical storms and cyclones. And though the Bay of Bengal, which is the eastern coast, it used to be impacted by cyclones, what have been observed over the last 1.5 decades is the number of cyclones have not increased very much in the eastern region, that is in the eastern coast. But the strength of the cyclones have gone up substantially. And that is impacting a larger area of the coastal land, along with the slow rise of sea level. So this is a combination. The sea levels are rising. So if a stronger storm comes, the storm surge, which is a wall of water which is driven by the wind, high-speed wind, reaches further into the land, actually contaminates with saline water much larger land, ponds, rivers, and drinking water sources like wells. So this is happening in a very large scale, particularly in the eastern coast. But what has happened in the western coast, traditionally, historically, the 130 years of climate records that we have in India, reasonably good climate records, starting from British period, colonial period, is that in the western coast, in the Arabian Sea, was far less prone to cyclones. There used to be cyclones, but not as many and not as powerful. But over the couple of decades past, a little more than 20 years, what has happened is the Arabian Sea has now, the number of cyclones have gone up by over 50% in less than 3 decades. So that's a massive rise. And the reason is twofold. One is the sea surface temperature of the Arabian Sea has risen faster. Second, there is a change in the wind shear, which actually disrupts cyclones. So the coastal population of our western coast, which was far less prepared, because historically they have not faced cyclones regularly, unlike the eastern coast population. If you move in the eastern coast, the states of Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, West Bengal, even Bangladesh, you will see everyone knows about cyclones. There are large number of cyclone shelters. Not well maintained everywhere, but good structures, at least some kind of infrastructure for protection from protection of human beings and their animals from the cyclones. Of course, the infrastructure that is there in the villages and coastal areas are not protected well, but at least the lives and the animal lives, human and animal lives, are protected. In the western coast, the preparation is far less because historically they have not faced. So that's another big change that has happened. So now let me come to the areas, as I was talking to Dr. Jin Kumar and others, that some of the impacts probably have been covered. Let me come down to what are the actions that India has taken. And we have tom-tommed this in many international forums. We have been clapped and appreciated also. There are some good things. There are some things which we are trying to basically fool people by announcing something where it goes completely other way. Let me quickly come to a few of these major ones. Everyone knows about India's NDC and its pledges, not commitment, pledges to the Paris Agreement, to the UNFCCC during the Paris Agreement. There are 3 commitments or pledges, which were, one was our emission intensity will be reduced. Initially, it was said that 45%, now it is 50%. So from 2005, emission intensity reduction means we will produce more GDP, but for some growth in GDP, the emission which was there will be less in comparison to earlier ones from the baseline of 2005. That's an easy target, and we have almost achieved what we have actually proposed by 2030, because India's pledge was not very ambitious to begin with. By reducing our emission intensity by 45% or 40%, that's a standard industrial process. And if you keep on increasing your efficiency, which is, as I said, normal industrial process, the emission intensity will come down. Like if you use critical or supercritical boilers, even in a coal power plant, then per megawatt hour power generated or electricity generated, your emissions of carbon dioxide and other emittents will be less. So that's a normal industrial process, but we have done well in almost achieving what we have or the government has committed or pledged in the during the Paris Agreement. The second was also a little ambitious, but not very ambitious, a large scale laying out of non-fossil energy. And non-fossil energy was emphasized, not renewable energy. Non-fossil includes renewable energies like solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, etc. That's the modern ones where the electricity is generated, plus nuclear power, plus hydropower. So in that, India did a trick by converting big hydropower, which is 25 megawatts and above, which was earlier not categorized as renewable. So government recategorized this renewable. So we have added around 46 gigawatt of power overnight into the renewable basket. But apart from that, we had reasonably good laying out of solar energy. Wind energy expansion has slowed down. There are issues, serious issues in both solar and wind, which relates to land, which relates to rights of pastoralists, which relates to wildlife conservation. But I will not go into that because I think some other people will also be going into that. But just to point one thing, you cannot have energy production in seriously large scale without having some significant impacts. So that's a myth. We'll have to see what kind of requirement we have, what kind of demand, and what kind of impacts, and have to balance. So not going deeper into that, I'll go back into the original issue. One, India has pledged that now the modified or expanded pledge is 50%. This is as a policy decision. 50% of our installed power capacity, not the energy capacity, because this is repeatedly being confused by even the governments. Even when governments give out an press bureau notification or announcement, they often talk about energy, 50% of energy. It's not energy. It's 50% of our installed power capacity will be from non-fossil sources by 2030. So this is a very limited thing, because if you look at India's total primary energy basket, which is very different from India's total installed capacity, which is again different from how much energy in terms of electricity India generates or produce every year. These three are different quantities, very different things. So in the terms of installed capacity, India has placed 50% of its total installed electricity capacity will be from non-fossil sources by 2030. And that will be, we are well placed to achieve. We are a little behind that, and it is only 2024. By 2030, we are well placed to achieve that. But that leaves apart a huge area, which is energy that Indians consume, not as electricity. If you look at how much energy India consumes in all forms, and if you look at how much energy of that is in the form of electricity, it's around 20%, a little less than 20%. So 80% of the energy that we consume is not in the form of electricity, but some part is in overlapping, because some coal is also used for electricity production, a major part. But even then, our energies come largely from coal, total energy, not electricity, something like 54%, then from oil, then from gas and biomass, non-formal, outside the commercial sector biomass, as well as commercial biomass production. And then a smaller part from hydro, and then from very minute from nuclear, and some parts from some 5% of the energy, less than 5%, 2.3% or more from solar and wind, etc. So we have not talked really about our energy basket as a policy and as our international pledges, etc. We have talked about our electricity component. So there is a very large gap, because if you look at India's effectively useless commitment of achieving so-called net zero by 2070, because
So
for
you're on mute.
2070. Pardon? Hello?
Yes, so you were on mute for a little while, just a little,
Yes.
few seconds.
Fine. So the climate systems will not wait for 2070 or 2060 before going bonkers, because we all know that the first red line of 1.5 degrees Celsius is most likely to be touched, reached and breached by 2030 to 2035. In this 5 years, which is just about 10 years time, within that, the first red line of 1.5 degree will definitely be reached and breached. And by present indication, that final red line of 2 degrees Celsius, beyond which we don't know what are the interconnected earth systems will be doing, going beyond their tipping points, that probably, going by present situation, present trends, it will be crossed by 2050. So which is just about 25 years, 26 years away. So obviously the 2070, 2060 timelines don't have really any meaning. But even if you consider that India is trying to reach net zero by 2070, the present policies of increasing coal consumption and coal production, because India just a couple of years ago were producing less than 700 million tons of coal. Today it is trying very hard to reach 1 billion ton, and this year probably there will be around 900 million tons of coal being produced. So if you continue to increase your coal production, if you continue to increase your consumption of petroleum, which is 87% of our petroleum is imported, and leave apart this part which is increased because we are increasingly importing from Russia discounted petroleum. But otherwise, all other petroleum imports are in dollars. So that's impacting our foreign exchange question also, balance of payment things also. So 87% last year, almost 86 to 87% of our oil is imported. Roughly 48% of our natural gas is imported. And even around 190 to 100 million tons of coal is also imported. We are increasingly importing, we are increasing our use of fossil fuels, but we are saying that our plan is to go to net zero. How it will be done? Nobody has any idea. Then you come into Government of India's fancy worded, highly publicized plans, which even the UN has applauded. The lifestyle for environment, LIFE. The lifestyle for environment very cleverly puts all the onus, or most of the onus, of reducing the emission to people and their enterprises rather than to the systems. And what actually we are doing in our own policies, we are increasing. We means, when I say I'm saying the government and the system in India is increasingly going towards a transportation system based on flights. A lot of new airlines are being incentivized. A lot of new airports are being encouraged to be opened up. And the train system, the railway system for normal middle class, lower middle class, and poor people is being continuously shrunk. And we are going into fancy high speed kind of thing, though we are nowhere near China, not even 1/100th of China, but we are trying to achieve that. What does it mean? What does it indicate? A transportation system based on short haul and medium haul flight is roughly 7 to 10 times as energy intensive and as emission intensive compared to a transportation system based on trains. So I'm repeating this. If you travel from, say, Bengaluru to Delhi and back by air, and if you do that by train, even Rajdhani Express kind of fast trains, the difference is, if you travel by air, your emission just for you will be 8 to 10 times as much as if you travel by train. So that's the kind of very convoluted lifestyle for environment. We are projecting a lifestyle where everyone, academics, businessmen, even activists, everyone will be flying by air. And we are talking about lifestyle for environment. I don't know how these two match. It's people who talk about this and people who are in the government. Probably they are in a parallel universe where our laws don't apply. Maybe different laws apply. Our natural laws of physics, laws of the universe, in our universe don't apply to this. So that's the kind of thing that we are doing. We are also continuously increasing our dependence on high energy cooling systems rather than planning cities, planning habitations which will be naturally cooler. And that you cannot help, because with the temperature going up, with this kind of cities building up, as I said earlier, which are 5 to 6 degrees hotter than even the outside, so you will have to have cooling. Otherwise, people will die in large numbers. And the cooling is increasingly becoming air conditioning dependent. If you look at a city like Delhi, in summer, 45 to 50% of its entire electricity consumption is for cooling. Right now, it will be more than 50% because unfortunately, even though June has not been reached, we have these temperatures which goes around 22nd June, which is 45 degrees, 46 degrees. So without cooling, a lot of people will fall sick. A lot of people might even die. People who are having heart problems, people who are senior citizens, um, those kind of vulnerable people will die. So this is one area. Instead of an integrated planning, we are going for high consumption, production, consumer goods production oriented response to the climate crisis. What are the other areas that we have in terms of policy? All of you probably know that there was this 2008 National Action Plan on Climate Change, which is not really a national action plan, which is a sort of statement, wishful statement. Under that, there were 8 national missions. 3 of them were in energy related, the National Solar Mission, Energy Efficiency Mission, etc. A few of them, good thing was a few of them are supposed to be adaptation oriented, because when you are talking about converting your energy systems from coal, oil, gas, though we are not doing that conversion, we are only adding everything. That also I should mention here, because India's policy, though India says we will be a climate champion and climate action will be good part of our governance, but what we are doing is we are, as I said, we are building more and more coal, more and more oil, more and more gas, along with more solar, more wind, and more everything. So all of the above, we tick all of the above and more and more. That is, it's an expansion. It's not a transition from coal, oil, gas, that is the fossil fuels, from a renewable economy. What we are doing is we are adding on to more coal, we are adding on more solar and more wind. So basically, it's an expansion, not a transition. So that needs to be understood. All our policies talk about transition, green transition, clean transition, all this, but we are not nowhere near even starting a transition. So that needs to be clear. The other point that I was saying was that even when we are talking about one is the energy systems, which are basically mitigation measures. That means the root cause of climate change, the greenhouse gases, we are trying to address, but which we are not doing actually. We are actually increasing our emissions every year. So apart from that, for populations which are less capable in terms of their economic and technological capacity, we need to build resistance or resilience to climate change impact, which are part of adaptation measures. So in the national action plans, under them, there are a few missions which are supposed to be adaptation missions, like the National Water Mission, National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture, National Mission on Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystems, etc. But if you look at those, you will find almost nothing which actually helps people build resilience at community level, or maybe in a panchayat level, or even a town level, city level. Most of it is mega engineering projects like building huge reservoirs. And the second is in the National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture. The focus is again highly technological, like GMOs and all. And now with this smart agriculture, high precision agriculture, which for Indian farmers, particularly in a situation where 84% roughly of our farmers are small and marginal farmers, their land holdings are either below 2 hectares or below 1 hectare. So in that kind of situation, it is leading to, and it will lead to even more dispossession and displacement of these farmers, who will become informal sector workers in some small town or city. So that's the kind of thing that we have said in our policies. The other area where in the adaptation area, where we had some hopes, some positives have happened, is particularly in the city level heat action plans. But as I said, these are not really looking at the entire scenario. These are looking at a restricted area. But even then, given I have to give some credit that large number of cities have come up with heat action plans. Some states have also come up with heat and climate action plans, like probably Telangana has combined this. Several cities has come up with a city level climate action plan. And as part of under the National Disaster Management Authority's guidance, large number of districts have come up with district disaster management plan of action. So these are a whole gamut of policy level actions translating into some plans, some kind of plans to address this kind of ecological issues. A very large part of that is climate related. So it's not that India do not have any framework or any policy to address climate change impacts. India has policies, whether they are effective or not. As I said, most of these are wrongly directed, and many of them are actually going on the negative side. But we have a set of plans both for mitigation as well as for adaptation and resilience building, which were, if they were properly designed and properly implemented, could have helped a very large number of population, very large segment of the population in adapting to climate change impact. But if you look at what is happening, if you even look at how large scale national schemes, and my request is at 40 minutes, please give me a warning. So I'll stop so that people can have their questions, etc. for 20 minutes.
Yes, sir.
So there is, if you look at even very large scale national programs like the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, which gives free houses, not free houses, money, 1,30,000 rupees roughly, to families to build a small house. If you look at them, when I was working in many coastal areas, including the Sundarbans, was quite surprised to see the designs and all, there is no clear guidance. Even if if the government scheme is giving money to poor families to build a house, there is absolutely no guideline on how to build a house in a cyclone-prone zone, in a submergence-prone zone, like the coastal areas often get submerged if it is a low-lying area. They are regularly exposed to very strong cyclones and tropical storms, but there is absolutely no guidance. And because of the amount of money, along with a little bit of corruption that is there in all systems in India, so there's part of the money is siphoned off at multiple levels, but the money that is even allocated, this 1,30,000, is not enough for building a resilient house. Second, as I'm mentioning repeatedly, even if it is possible to build a resilient house with a little bit of extra money that the family can master on their own, apart from the government support, there is absolutely no guideline, no clear design what you should do in what area. In earthquake-prone zones, what you should do. In cyclone-prone zones, what you should do. Where submergence-prone zones, what you should do. What kind of house? Nothing. So our plans in paper, they exist, adaptation plans. There is National Adaptation Fund also. But while you come to see what actually gets translated in very large scale, like the Prime Minister Awas Yojana, crores of houses are being built, and you don't see any input, any thought that these houses should be more adaptable, more resilient to climate impacts or even other disaster impact. So that's a major disconnect. And some of the other problem areas that in our policies, see, our National Disaster Management Authority, the whole area of disaster management is under the Ministry of Home Affairs. It's connected with somehow with security, policing, home affairs. Whereas most other areas of climate and environmental management is under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And as everyone knows, the Home Affairs Ministry is a far more heavyweight ministry than the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. If you look at the two budgets, it will be very clear. The Ministry of Environment gets hardly 3,200 crore even in this year's budget, whereas the Home Ministry gets 30 times as much, 40 times as much. So one is a very heavyweight ministry, number two ministry, in fact, after the Prime Minister office. The second is a very lightweight minor ministry, which no one, almost today's India, no one cares very much about what the Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change puts out. So some areas which are under the Home Ministry, obviously there is very little connect with what the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change does. And even if it does something good, which often it do not, even then it will not get the traction, because if it comes into conflict with any other ministry, which is heavyweight ministry, either the Home Ministry or Education or the mainstream financial ministries, it do not happen. The same thing happened with a lot of other policies in the environmental domain also. Like if you look, the related crisis with climate change is air pollution. And when in the 2015, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change came out with these norms for coal power plant and gave them December 2017 as the deadline. None of the coal power plants complied. Instead of penalizing and holding them accountable, the government extended from 17 to 22. By 22, hardly 2 or 3 plants complied, and the government is now silent. So it's being just a pollution, air pollution, which is connected with climate change, because the major component of air pollution comes from fossil fuel burning, which is also the major primary cause of climate change. So what I said is, I think I'll stop now. A whole lot of impacts, most important for India and South Asia. There are 3-4 areas that I have talked about. The policies, there is a whole gamut of policies, both for mitigation and adaptation and resilience. But what we are doing actually, and even many of the policies are directing, is actually increasing the problem rather than tackling. Have questions, I'll be happy to answer. I hopefully.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll go to Bhargavi ma'am for her remarks in the session. And in the meanwhile, participants, you can raise your hands and you can also put your questions in the Q&A boxes so we can streamline and take them one at a time. Ma'am, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, Soumya. It was wonderful listening to you. Every time I listen to you, there's so much that I learn, and it's fascinating to listen to you. And thank you for highlighting many aspects of what is happening from a climate change perspective today. The whole thing that you mentioned about the heat index. The fact that high temperature and high humidity is playing havoc on the health of particularly the urban marginalized communities who are often working in open systems, and how it is affecting their health. That is something very, very important, and you brought the focus to that, and you also called it a killer combination. And also, so to address that, I would like all our participants to again go back to what we discussed last week, where we spoke about the 73rd and the 74th Amendment. So if you go to the 74th Amendment and see the Schedule 12, all the points that Soumya mentioned comes literally under that. So if you just Google for it and see what kind of points are there, urban planning, and which includes town planning. So today we are talking about cities where we did not plan for this. And this was something that was predicted so many years ago, right? And we went around felling trees everywhere. We went around diluting our building bylaws. We diluted the floor area ratio indices everywhere. So all of this resulted in the current concrete jungle that we have created. And the planning of, I'm just looking at the 12th schedule and going point by point, because each of that is what just Soumya mentioned. Planning of land use and construction of buildings, I just mentioned. Economic and social development. So if we are looking at the urban poor and their contribution to the GDP, without them, the cities will just collapse. Just imagine if waste is not picked up from your streets. It will become impossible, and we will all have a Surat-like situation where plague will hit, right? But what is being done to those workers so that they can manage this heat and flood and that kind of situation? We are not doing anything. Roads and bridges, yes, we are pouring more concrete all over, and most of our cities have flyovers and underpasses in places that are only relocating the traffic. And in Bangalore, we have flyovers on which we have traffic junctions. We are known for that. And Soumya also highlighted the importance of water, which is so connected to this whole heat wave and what we are witnessing. And today, Bangalore, and like many other cities, is really pressed for water, and many of the people, predominantly the IT sector, which is placed in Bangalore North and Bangalore East, they are threatened because they will have to leave the city if there is no water. Their families cannot live here any longer, and they also cannot live here any longer. So even IT companies have said that they will move away from cities like Bangalore. And even simple things like water supply is the function of, at the end of the day, the local government. And these local governments, like we discussed, have done nothing about being prepared for this. And all the public health services that we just discussed, the Soumya just discussed, it's again the function of the local government. Your ward committee should be able to address all these issues. Urban forestry comes under them. So if at all even now it is not too late, if we can identify spaces where some of the rewilding can take place, I think there is still hope. Then fire services, and a whole lot of other sections regarding safeguarding the interests of weaker sections is again a function of the wards and the ward committees. Then the slum improvement, urban poverty elevation. So there's so much more there. You can go through the list, but each of it is eventually the function of the local ward office. And today we've made our ward offices almost dysfunctional because they just do some random stuff without applying their minds. And even for them, work is about pouring concrete and cement, and how much of cement is bought, how much of stone is bought. That's the end of it. So that needs to be broken if we are to address climate change. And all these challenges that we are talking about, I think it has to be a ground up plan. Only then cities will be capable of addressing these issues. If the plans, again, like Soumya just discussed, most of the plans are top down. And in a top-down plan like this, these plans will largely remain techno-focused, and all this, just like smart city projects, we'll have a whole lot of technicals, app-based and smartphone-based facilities, which the poor obviously can't handle at all, and they cannot access it, more importantly. Then Soumya also addressed about this whole emission issue and how our energy dependence is on coal, oil, gas. And I resonate with every word that he said, because we are only expanding each of it. There is no transition. And and the word just transition is completely absent in the current context. There is nothing just about it. And a very important point Soumya made is about the energy basket policy. That is, again, something that we really need to focus on. And I think as students of this program, you have a lot of scope to build your research and discussions and essays and papers on that. Just as how last week we learned about the lack of a restoration policy, this week we are learning about how the energy basket policy is largely lacking. And another important point Soumya mentioned about is how the onus of the responsibility today lies on the people. So the government has literally washed its hands off, and you're putting the onus on a community where there is no awareness. A large section of our people have no idea what is happening. So how can they even take responsibility, right? So much of the information is largely in English, and it is, we are constantly preaching for the converted. There is very little that is getting translated to local regional languages, making sure, everybody understands what this is about. That is largely lacking. So this whole thing of putting responsibility on the people is again defeated because people don't even know what is happening. Soumya also mentioned about a whole lot of project expansions. Yes, the airport expansion plan is something that is going on in every city, every second tier city, and smaller towns where there are, huge tourism sectors that are operating. And that is a very troubling scenario, because again, over here, it is land that is becoming a huge issue. Land grabs are happening left, right, center. The commons are being taken away. Local people are being given very small compensations for this, although, like I mentioned last time, the Land Acquisition and Rehabilitation Resettlement Act of 2015 has never been followed after the amendments in any of the states. Many of these newer policies of industrialization and these kind of expansion plans, they are determining the land use policy in many of the states. So the land reforms that are taking place in every state is based on all of this and not based on what the people of the land need, or even the voices of the local people is completely absent when framing these kind of policies. And airport expansions come at a huge cost. I have briefly studied the expansion of Bangalore Airport, and I can, talk about it for a long time, but it comes at a huge social impact. While there is environment impact of, local forest patches going, they disturb the local drainage of the land, lakes are destroyed, all of that. We are talking about a community who have no other skill to move on in life. And we are definitely creating an intergenerational poverty and a kind of poverty from which things can never be reversed. We are pushing people down that line. And again, what he mentioned about lifestyle for environment, that's just such a greenwash, because everywhere you see today, from malls to small shops, have everything green. When you dig into it a little bit, you'll see that there is nothing green about it. A simple thing like how khadi is defined, or how handmade is defined, or handloom is defined, will show that how the polyvastra, polycotton, polyester, everything is making its way, and we are all assuming that it is handmade and handloom. So similarly, every aspect of it, we are being cheated into it. So it's really nice that he highlighted that. It will open our eyes, because you will, every time you buy something or see something, you will really understand what's behind it. And yes, this whole dependence on high energy cooling systems. I was recently at one of these big stores that sells all kinds of equipment, and I was asking them what is the most highly sold appliance during the last 2 months, and they said it has been refrigerators and air conditioners. So it is becoming impossible for people to live in their homes, given that we are all so close to each other. The buildings are all touching each other. Obviously, you need dependence on AC, and that in turn is causing more emissions, obviously. And also it's also creating a local. It's adding to the local heat island effect, definitely. And the national missions, and how every one of those missions are mega infrastructure project plans, is something we need to really comprehend and understand, because there's nothing truly meaningful in each of that. Again, I can speak from examples of Bangalore, where 10 years ago, 12 years ago, people protested. 20 years ago, in 2004, Bangalore started, the local city municipality started felling off all the trees. So people protested, people climbed onto the trees and said, you're not cutting this tree. This tree has been here all my life, and I can own, it's an identity to my street, to my life, to my school, everything. But eventually, most of the trees got cut down in Bangalore, and today Bangalore, this summer was horrible. So we also landed up widening our roads. We felled our trees and we widened our roads, and today we are facing what we are facing. And there are no plans to understand what was the mistake we made. So can we go back and correct that, and can we change something, or can we do something for the next 20 years? See, those trees were there, the trees that were there in 2004, 2005 that we managed to chop, were trees that were planted in the 60s and 70s by the early planners of Bangalore. and or any other city, for example. So somebody planted it, so those trees were there. But after these trees were filled, Bangalore largely has never replanted the saplings, despite all the law that exists in Karnataka. So Karnataka is one of those states which has that if you fell one tree, two saplings have to be planted. Okay, but nowhere that has been really practiced with letter and spirit. And another important point Soumya made is also about this whole no guidelines for any of these plans and the different zones that Soumya mentioned. That also reminds me of this whole Swachh Bharat mission. You know, the Swachh Bharat mission made everybody go around building toilets, and the Anganwadi workers and health workers, ASHA workers, were in charge of convincing people to build toilets. And many rural areas of Karnataka where I have seen, the toilets have been built, the money has been spent, but toilets are not used because there is no water there to use those toilets. People continue to go into their fields and other places to answer their nature calls because there are regions where there is no water, and you can't be building a toilet like how you would build in a place where there is plenty of water. So village after village has built these toilets, and on top of those toilets there are these boards which say that, as part of the Swachh Bharat mission, so much money was given and so much was put in by the local people, and when it was built, and how much cement was used, how much brick was used. All those details are there. For what joy, right? So and then they also push the panchayats to call their panchayat, every village, a ODF village. But it really is not true if many of these villages are calling them ODF, because we know for sure that these toilets are not being used. So these are some very important points that Soumya made, and I thank him for awakening us and helping us see many of these aspects that are happening all around us. And over to him to take some questions. Sorry if I crossed my time. Thanks, Soumya.
Yes, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. We do have one question. Anvesha Maharanaji, if you'd like to unmute and ask the question.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, sir. Thank you for the great overview. My question was, do we need to emphasize more on making rules to ensure those implementation and monitoring of action plans? Because there are a lot of action plans and you were talking about guidelines and stuff.
Yes. Any another question? The two I can take and then start answering, and then
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sure.
anyone
Anusha,
else?
all right.
Okay.
Anvesha ji, go ahead if you have another one.
Okay, yeah. So the next question was, how can the citizens be more involved in pushing for these implementations, and is awareness and active citizenry the key?
See, there are these two questions are interconnected. One is, yes, as I said, there are lots of plans. I also didn't mention the state action plan on climate change, which every state has, and every SAPCC is the state action plan on climate change. So every state has this, the second version. First, they made around 2012 to 2014-15, and the second versions have been made now. If you look at this, and each of these SAPCCs also have 8 to 12 sectors. Each state action plan has agriculture, water, energy, forest, urban development, like this. So one major task is have as citizens groups, I'm not talking about individuals, but as citizens groups, have we really looked into what the plans are, which of the plans exist for our this kind of challenges? Like one is climate change mitigation and resilience, adaptation and resilience building, and converting society to a just what we call just transition. We have energy system which is not based on fossil fuel, but which also in the transition process, which does justice to both the workers in the dirty energy sector as well as those who have been impacted by the energy systems. So one is to look at those, to analyze those, and as I said, I can point out many others where policies have been made apparently for addressing climate change, but those are actually increasing the climate change, increasing the climate change impacts and making the situation even worse. Like as I said, if you focus on transportation based on aviation, it will be making it worse. If you are, like Bhargavi also brought out examples, if you are going for high energy consumption malls and completely air conditioned environments and for shopping and everything else, then you are actually you are increasing the problem rather than addressing. So one task is to look at the policies and plans. There's a whole lot, right from the national missions to the state action plans, to the state level sectors, to the district disaster management plan of action, and to the heat action plans and flood action plans. So many of these are supposed to address this problem, but many of these are not designed right. That's one area. Second is the implementation. What is your second question? What is the kind of implementation that you are doing? One first task is, once you make a plan, supposing for a district, then the governments or the governance structure is responsible to take it to people, make them aware, do this interaction, take feedback, and then improve the plans. That has not happened in 99% of the cases. So there the citizens groups have a large role. In fact, starting from 2011, our group, we have a network called MOSAM, All India Network, where around 40 groups are members. We have intervened in the state action plans in 8 states, in the consultation, in the public discussion, which the state governments were resisting at beginning, but ultimately they opened up and we intervened, we organized public discussions and gave input, lot of input to the action plans. Similar actions are needed by citizens groups everywhere if we need to make these plans people-centric, people-oriented, and really effective. So citizens groups, as your second question was, what role? So first role is get aware of this whole set of policies and action plans. See where your areas are, important areas are. Like if you are living in a city, the area of urban heat and flood action plans is extremely important. And in your area, in your city, which are the most vulnerable populations? The 6 or 7 segments that I charted out, these are the most vulnerable sections, not the upper middle class who can afford to be in an air-conditioned place, both in their homes and their workplace, not them. They come much later. So, like if the question of urban flooding has increased dramatically. Who suffers the most in urban flooding? Like the Bengaluru urban flood, media was pointing, oh, this rich people's car was submerged. It doesn't matter to him or them because they have 10 cars and they can buy a car and they can get the insurance and replace the car. But who live in a city in the low-lying areas by the drainage channels, which are mostly small streams and rivers earlier, the drainage channels? It's the lowest income people who live there. And the first place that will be getting flooded and the land will be washed out is the places where these lowest income people are settling by the river drainage channels. So can we do the mapping? Can we do mapping of all these vulnerable people? What are the policies that are needed? Whether these are policies are really addressing them? As far as I have seen, about 7, 8, 9 city plans, they don't address this. They don't even recognize this as a problem. When I was present into the DUSIB, the Delhi Urban Settlement Improvement Board, who said we have 23 lakh people under our jurisdiction. And when I presented this, they said, oh, this was not in our radar. Oh, now we'll have to include this. So this is a question. This is a situation where major towns, major cities like Delhi, their major government bodies who take care of 23 lakh, 25 lakh people under their jurisdiction, so-called unauthorized and illegal colonies, even they have not taken into consideration. So as citizens groups, we have a responsibility to intervene in all these plans, know which are the plans, know which are the vulnerable populations, what kind of requirements are there. That also needs our own knowledge and understanding needs to be built up. Like I said, the heat index. If you just look at heat action, it will not address the problem. You have to understand how heat and humidity act together. You have to build up capacity, which is very easy to build up for working class communities to monitor their own working environment, the climate condition, which instruments cost around 500 rupees. Any such small community can monitor that, understand that, and can build up some resilience. Like I have been working with the National Hawkers Federation for the street vendors. I have also worked with the National Fish Workers Forum for coastal fish workers, directly with communities. So this kind of intervention is needed by the civil society and by activist groups. But as I said, I'll repeat, you have to build up your own understanding first.
Thank you.
If
Thank you so much.
other people have any other question quickly, then or otherwise.
Yes, so we do have more questions, but in light of the time, since we're running a little bit, the participants, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We can take it after Debadityo sir's session. You can put your questions in the Q&A box, and in the meanwhile, sir, ma'am, we can go ahead with the next session.
Sure. And if you look, send me afterwards, and I will also try to answer. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Please
Thank
do
you,
put.
everyone.
Thank you so much, sir. Please do put your questions in the Q&A box. We will reach out to sir with your questions, and you'll get a response back. Now we'd like to quickly move on to our next session, and I'm honored to invite Mr. Debadityo Sinha ji, Senior Resident Fellow and Lead Climate and Ecosystems Team at Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, New Delhi, visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI. Sir will be guiding us through the topic of environmental clearance and forest clearances. We welcome you, sir. The floor is all yours. Please take it from here.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Priyanka. Uh, so, actually, I'll be because it's a more like a training program. So, I thought I'll be giving an introduction to how what are environmental laws, why they are different, some basic foundation of environmental law, and then I'll speak some little bit about the environmental clearance, forest clearance, and also the recent amendments which have been going through. Because the topic is so vast, I don't think that I will be able to discuss in detail during this talk. So either the choice I had for myself was either I talk only about one particular law, or I can talk about the general environmental law. And given your cohort is, I think, is fairly from different background, so I thought that it is important to give people idea what is environmental law means and what principle it follows and how it evolved. So it can help a lot. I hope I'm audible clearly. Right? So let me share one slide, and I will try to quickly go through it in the initial portion so that I have more time to discuss the thing. Okay. So, are you able to see the screen, right? Okay.
Yes, sir, we can see this.
Fine. So in this talk, I will discuss, as I mentioned, that why environmental law is different from other law. So sometimes when I talk, so some senior people tell that every person say that their particular area is different, very unique. But I will definitely try to talk some sense that why environmental law is different than other laws if you compare with any other corporate law, economic law, whatever, criminal law. How it has evolved, basics of Air and Water Act, which is run through it. Green clearances, I will discuss a little bit about what it means. We'll discuss some about the NGT and challenges and recent amendments. Okay. So the basic thing about environmental law, the very unique thing about environmental law is that it is not just one law. So if you see environmental law, it is quite vast, and even our general laws, they also have some provisions on public nuisance and all this kind of thing. Or municipal laws are there, bylaws, everything is there. But generally also, if you see, environmental law is not a single law. You cannot say EP Act, Environmental Protection Act is the only law. We have so many laws, so many notifications, so many rules. So if you start counting, then it becomes a topic of your, maybe you can do a PhD, what all laws we had till date. And and other thing is that it is transdisciplinary. So it is not a very you can say just environment. It affects every other sector. It is linked with every other sector. You take any area of environmental law, any other area of law, it is like environmental laws affect those as well. And the most important part is that environmental law has a temporal dimension, which means that it talks about the past impact. It also talks about the future impact. This is the law which talks about taking steps today to prevent any mishappening in the future. Okay, so and it follows in every environmental law. If you see, there's a whole time dimension is there. Other important part where I want to stress a little more is that it is not just about human rights. Sometimes we talk only about the rights-based approach, but environmental law is, of course, human rights is a part of it. But it is beyond that. It is also talking about the rights, equal rights for non-living things as well. When we talk about conservation of river, when we talk about conservation of other ecosystems, it is not always just living beings. So it is human beings, non-human living beings, and non-living things. So my perspective is always ecocentric. So I believe that environmental laws are supposed to be ecocentric. That we cannot say that human rights should always be above the ecosystem right. I say every rights are equal, and we cannot just pick and choose. Okay. Third, believe that modern environmental law is very recent. Of course, there are if you go through literature, there are instances where environmental laws has been there since time memorial. During empirical period, all this period, this used to exist in some form. Even in our historical, all the mythological textbook, you will find some reference to environmental laws. But the modern environmental laws are very recent and mostly kick-started after the Stockholm Conference, which we will briefly discuss. And in India, of course, this whole influence of global thing was already there, but it's largely affected by the domestic, things, social movements and accidents like Chipko and movement against these dams in Uttarakhand, Tehri Dam. Okay, so this kind of when we became independent, there was so much we were developing, and these impacts were visible after a certain time, and there was a whole social movement. They also influenced the whole environmental jurisprudence, how the laws are made, what judgment the courts gave. Courts have a very important role in shaping the environmental laws since last 3-4 decades, and yeah, and we have seen how our constitutional that constitution there are 3 lists: center, state, and concurrent list. So basically, state is where the state can make the law. Center is where subjects the center can make the law. Concurrent list is where both the center and state can make, or mainly the center prescribes the law and state can implement it, but state can also modify the law. So basically both has the say. So forest, environment, wildlife, they were all in state list in the beginning, and it was through amendments that they were brought under concurrent list when we saw that states were not able to protect the environment. So there is a whole history to it, but we will see if we can. Yeah. Now that was the historical part, but there's some basic thing which you need to understand, and if you understand this basic, then you can understand the whole environmental laws principle. So any environmental law, it should follow this mitigation hierarchy. So what it says is that suppose there is some activity you have to do. For example, assume that you have to build a flyover over a wetland or forest. Okay, fine. First, you have to identify whether there is need of this project, whether we actually need, and whether there is alternative exist. Alternative not only in terms of road, whether we can think of some other mode of transportation. Okay, and whether this road is required or not. And then only if it is unavoidable, we need that kind of development or whatever activity we want. Just give me a moment. Then only we can take a call that we should go ahead with the project. That is avoidance. Second is minimization. Is okay, fine, now we have decided that strategically or whatever this project is justified, then the focus should be minimization of the impact. Okay, so by taking whatever measures we want, okay, the law can suggest. So minimization comes second to it. The first is avoidance. First is whether I want to proceed with this activity. This should be the basic first question we should ask in any activity which concerns environment. Second is minimize. Some cases the project is so important that and there is no other option to minimize the impact. It has to come. It has to destroy habitat. It has to affect people's life, whatever. Then the third comes the restoration. Can we restore those damages? So that is the third step. Restoration comes third in the mitigation hierarchy. And when all these three options exhaust, then we come to offsets. Like, okay, fine, we tried every other option, avoidance not possible, minimization not possible, restoration not possible. So lastly, we compensate for that. It is the offset. But usually what happens is we don't follow this material hierarchy in practice. It's the most unfortunate part, but this is the basics of environmental law. So when you talk about avoidance, this principle called precautionary principle, it is a very basic fundamental environmental laws principle, which says that it actually means that you can have various interpretation, but in simple language you can say any activity which has some impact which is uncertain. So for example, you have a glass of water, you are either thirsty and someone tells you there is a source of water, but the water can be poisonous. So will you drink that water? So my answer will be no. I will not drink the water because it is poisonous. It will be risk thing. So that is precaution principle. So when the outcomes are uncertain, when you are not scientifically, you cannot be very sure what the impact will be, then best is not do the activity. Okay, that is one thing. So precaution principle is followed in all environmental laws, especially EIA was supposed to help us decide whether this project has to go or not go. Okay. Then comes the principle of sustainable development. When we talk about the minimization, especially the material hierarchy, is that okay, fine, we have to develop this activity, then it should not exhaust to that level that it cannot renew itself or it cannot be available for the future generation or the marginalized societies. So this is called principle of sustainable development. The development should be sustainable. Other important principle is that public trust doctrine. Now this is also very important to understand that under this doctrine, it is said that the state is a trustee of the natural resource. It is not owner of it. So it is preserving the natural resource for the public benefit. Okay. So usually people mistake that all the resources are owned by the government or any government is the owner. So government is not the owner. They are the trustee and trustee for this ecosystem, because these resources very much possibility that some powerful people will exploit it for their own benefit. So we want the government to keep it safe for the public welfare or future generation, whatever we want. So this is the duty of the government, which says public trust doctrine. And when we talk about the offsets or restoration, so basically polluter pays principle, everyone knows about it, I hope that it says that anyone who pollute, and this meaning of pollute has changed a lot. So it is not only just polluting, it is also damaging the environment. So we have widened the meaning of polluter pays. So it is anyone who's damaging environment, they should pay for the restoration of the whatever damages it is. Okay, now there are certain more levels, like how to assess damages, all these things. There are challenges are there, but this is the basic principle which you need to follow. There is one interesting principle called absolute liability. So traditionally, globally, we used to follow strict liability. It says that polluter pays principle may, if someone is doing an activity and it damages, it causes some environmental damage, it can pollute a river, then the polluter has to pay. But there were some exceptions. For example, if there is an earthquake, or some act of God, or something like if there is a theft in his premises, or someone has any misintention and malintention and they deliberately tried to malign the person, so they did something to cause bad reputation to the company. In those cases, there were exceptions that the company can take exemption that I was not aware of these things. There were some external factors, that's why. So this exception was there globally. But Indian Court, Supreme Court of India, they coined this principle absolute liability, where they said, when I am doing any hazardous activity, then I know that what are the risks towards it. Then I am responsible to take the necessary precautions that these mishappenings don't occur. So for example, if I am carrying out a hazardous activity and I know it is affected by, maybe affected by the earthquake or flood, then it is my responsibility to take enough efforts to prevent those activities in that scenario, okay, or to make it safe from any external activities, something like that. So this came in case of this Shriram gas leak case in Delhi. Actually, it happened in between Bhopal gas strategy and this thing that time. So this is where our Indian judiciary has contributed significantly. There is no exemption, and this has been followed in is followed in all the judicial order, absolute liability. So you cannot take any argument that I was not whatever. Sixth is very important in present days, at least in last 10-12 years. Why I said 10-12 years? Because often we say all these changes happened in since 2014. It is not like that. Changes started happening in 2012, 13 onwards, and what we say is the scale has just gone up. Okay, so what the principle says is that whenever we amend the law, it should be always strengthened. It should not be relaxed. Okay, the safeguards cannot be relaxed. If you amend the law, the safeguard has to be always strengthened. You have to make stricter laws. So this is what has to be followed in any lawmaking process. You can say this is fundamental principle of environmental regulation, but this can also be say challenges in implementation of environmental laws. So you can see both ways, because none of these principles are followed in practice. When I say none, actually maybe some exceptions, but in my experience in the last 15-20 years, I have seen these are violated left, right and center. One interesting report, I think as a student you must read, is this first global report on environmental rule of law by UNEP in 2019. It is a fantastic report. Anyone interested in environmental laws, they must read this. Very simple language, but it will give you the basic foundation. So I will just try to quickly go through it. So basically, when we talk about international aspiration, influence, it is mostly from Stockholm Conference, and that time it was called Stockholm Summit on Human Environment. Okay. So we used to define environment from a very anthropocentric angle. We say environment, if we studied, we talk about definition of environment, whatever surrounding human beings are supposed to be called environment. And that time I think pollution was the main issue that time. And issues like today, like climate change and all this thing, people used to talk about it, but no one thought that this issue will be so difficult. Like that time it was mostly this polluting industries and the public health issue, okay, more than other issues. So those issues were there, but mainly it was public health issue because of the pollution. And there was a global political understanding. It was only the political leaders, and that they met and they decided that there is a consensus that we should do, and there was whole enthusiasm was there. First time something happening like that. And if you see most of the environmental laws in India, they started from that moment, 72, most of this. But again, the issue of developing was developed is nothing new. It has been there since that time, and that's why we had this commission under Norwegian president, and into her name, Brundtland Commission, and this report is there. So 83 they came up with this report, and they said that we should follow principle of sustainable development. That we should not compromise with our development. Development is a basic human right, but we should ensure that it has to be sustainable, whatever that means. But that was some middle path which was found out. Then after 72, 92, we had this Rio conference again, and this time, apart from the political leaders, we had scientists and CSOs part of the thing. And we again, as usual, we had some targets, we have some agreements. So last time we had UNEP, now we have UNFCCC, Convention on Climate Change. We had, now first time we talk about biological diversity, because the biodiversity loss was also very significant, because loss of forest and everything. So that was something which everyone recognized. And then there was also Commission on Sustainable Development and Global Environment Facility Trust Fund. So basically all these facilitating mechanism was there. And we had some more protocols, like Kyoto Protocol was there to reduce GHGs. There Cartagena Protocol, there was the Montreal Protocol, all these things were going side by side. Just very quickly I will go through it, everyone knows about it. Just I wanted to show how we have gone globally, things were happening. If you see, the one common thing is that every time there was some agreement, but when it comes to implementation, some country will back out, and it was very susceptible to the political regime of any country. Okay, so and I don't need to go in detail into it, but the end ultimately it comes between developing and developed worlds, and we developing countries always say that you should fund us. And last year there was some progress in terms of funding, like there was Green Climate Fund. There was this loss and damage, which we decided last year, that there was some commitment. There was special climate change fund, adaptation fund, all these things were there, and there was commitment from the countries to increase their renewable capacity. Now again, we have to understand there is slowly takeover. Now this is the basic. You can understand how since the start of Stockholm, it started from political leaders, then there were scientists, then there were CSOs. Then there were these industries, part of it. Now, if you see the solutions, they are all very market-friendly solutions. So they are only talking about solutions which are benefiting the countries in some way. In the market should benefit. Like this is how I see it. Now you may differ and disagree with me, but this is how I'm seeing that the COP summits are slowly becoming more like a market-driven like a solution. No one is talking about the prevention, and this fossil fuel, although we acknowledge that they are the root cause of climate change, but very less thing we are doing towards it. Even in the this renewable energy, there are so many problems. Renewable energy is not a solution. Solution maybe you can say not big projects. So basically, what the countries are doing, even India, what we are doing, we are promoting big projects, and you see like how they impact the community, the marginalized community especially. We have to be very careful when we say community. Community includes everyone. So it includes powerful, it includes everyone. So I say marginalized communities who are affected by this kind of biased development. And wherever markets take over, so it becomes a very different ballgame altogether. We have recently seen the Supreme Court has, first time, it has diverged from its traditional view of conservationists, saying that it's okay to affect the habitat of getting the mustard in Rajasthan if you want to achieve the net zero target. I wrote an article on it. You can search for it. How the reasoning was so flawed. So so this has very influence on our law, our political leaders, our judiciary. So you cannot just separate all these things together separately, because very few people can actually go into the complications of it, like how complex these are, how it is affecting the other thing. Now, environmental laws, if you think it is derived from three things. One is the common law, that is as we know that laws that is derived from custom or judicial precedent rather than statute. Statute is something which is passed by the parliament, which is the law of the land. Okay, so common law is which is evolved through our customary whatever judicial precedent, whatever, like all the principles are mentioned. They are like part of the common law. Civil law is what is written as a law, which is passed by the legislature in the parliament. And criminal law, you have to understand, sometimes we think criminalization kya hai. So very basic criminal is that whenever there's a conflict between me and some other person, where there's not a public interest involved, or the state is not involved, it becomes a civil matter. For example, Motor Vehicle Act, you can say it's a civil, you may not be jailed if you follow all the law. It's an accident. You have the license, you are driving, you are following all the things, you are not drunk, then it becomes a civil matter. So you can settle it in the court by paying compensation. But if your conduct is criminal, that when your activity is something which is affecting the larger law and order, then state can initiate action against you. For example, if I'm drunk, if I'm underage, if I don't have the license, I'm driving the car, then it becomes criminal matter. Because here I am a threat to the society, I'm not following the law. So basically, this is, I just gave an example to make you simply understand. So, but environmental law, if you see, there are some provisions which are criminal, some provisions which are civil, and largely in practice, if you say maybe the law is criminal, there are some provisions which now they have removed, but largely we don't see the public generally, the politicians or even judges, they don't see environmental law as a criminal law. I don't know what the reason is. Maybe this is how it has evolved it. So criminal action in environmental law is very, very rare. So to say, maybe it has been used in criminal way to against the marginal society to harass people. That is different story. But generally, environmental offense is not seen as a criminal offense. Generally, I'm not taking a side, but telling you what is the thing. Now, environmental law in India, they also follow this principle of eminent domain. So I told you this public trust doctrine, which should be the doctrine after independence. But if you see most of the natural resource law, the forest law, Indian Forest Act, or any other this kind of land law, property law, they follow principle of eminent domain. That means the state has complete control and authority over everything that comes into its territory. So even if I am private owner, my rights are limited. So if the state wants, they can take control over that land. And you will see this provision in most of the property law. In forest law also this provision is there in the Forest Act. So people, I spoke with many forest officers, very senior, very retired, people, whether this provision has been ever used. So as per my knowledge, this provision of acquiring land in public interest by government has been very rare under the Forest Act. Though the provision is there, it is still there till 1927. Now this is just a basic history of how it has evolved in India after since 72. So initially we didn't have any separate ministry for environment and forest. It was mostly under Ministry of Science and Technology, and forests were managed by mostly Ministry of Agriculture. Okay, and we had the National Council of Environmental Policy and Planning set up in under DS 1072. It became Ministry of Environment and Forest in 1985. You can Google about the history. There was committees and all we suggested to have a separate ministry. So in my Ministry of Environment and Forest is very fairly new if you compare to older ministries. There was been amendment in Constitution to make it as a duty of the state and citizens to protect environment. There is duty on the state as well. To protect the environment and wildlife. 74 Amendment, Bhargavi and other people were talking about it. So this was also decentralized. Unfortunately, we don't follow it, but ideally, all the laws, there are some provisions, but we are seeing this amendment is slightly fading away. If you see the actual implementation, so is actually very problematic. So we are not able to use this amendment properly when any environmental laws. Then we had this policy statement of amendment pollution, whatever. We have environment pollution action plan, whatever. Now, one thing I want to mention here is that ideally policy should come first and laws should be made later on. In India, we have seen that laws are made first and policies come after 10-20 years. So this is always there. If you take the forest policy, if you take the environmental policy, they came after the laws are passed. So this mismatch is always there. Supreme Court, I mentioned this principle of absolute liability. Supreme Court has coined. Forest laws, this T.N. Godawaraman, in 90s, this case was going on since that, and it has actually, I will say, helped to reduce the deforestation. It has not able to stop, but it has given a one tool to people to go to the court, and because of fear of the court, because of uncertainty, we have managed to save a lot amount of more forests. But now the recent amendments, we are seeing that how the Parliament is trying to change that forest regulation, because it was so developed in such a way it become very protectionist. Central Impact Committee, Supreme Court had this central committee, but now it is again now government is appointing the members, and we have seen the recent appointments are actually very problematic. If you see the kind of people are appointed, basically this committee was previously in the Supreme Court, but now it is functioning as a part of the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So when it becomes part of the government, so it loses the independence. So it's not, and CEC, if you see the history of CEC, it has been very active in protecting forest and stopping mining, stopping these activities here and there. Pollution control policies, we all know about this, emission standards and everything, which is steered by the Supreme Court, forced by the Supreme Court. And one thing I want to mention here is that this is when you talk to political leaders and the other people. So actually, environmental issues are also very political, because it is, you will say, against whether it looks like it is affecting my right to enjoy luxuries or whatever. Allow the companies to make margins, whatever. So politicians are very happy when courts prescribe these laws, because it gives them a safe place to say that it is not our law, this is what court has said. Even the politicians will know this is affecting, this is bad for the country, this is bad for the state, but they're under pressure from a lot of people, and you have to accept that most of the people, they are least bothered about the environmental conservation. Okay? They are most concerned about their own interest. So I think that's why the Supreme Court has been quite successful, because there has been some acceptance on politicians as well, because they know that this is problematic and we need someone to tell us what to do so that we are safe. That is the main thing. We had National Green Tribunal, which became active in 2010, 10 and 11 it was fully active. It has gone through ups and downs, so it depends on chairperson and how it is run. It is not an entirely court, but it is very interesting kind of setup. So we say quasi-judicial body, but NGT has quite significant powers over deciding over environmental matters, and challenge over NGT can only be in Supreme Court. So and there is a lot of case laws over it. Supreme Court has actually steered this declaration of buffer zones and wildlife corridors around national park and sanctuary in several matters. So these are few major points in the last 2-3 decades. Just a summary of most of the key environmental laws: Wildlife Protection Act, Water Prevention Act, Forest Conservation Act, Air Act, Environmental Protection Act, Public Liability Insurance Act, Biodiversity Act, Scheduled FRA, NGT Act, and many state legislation. And this act has been now amended and new acts are brought about. Now coming to this point of environmental clearances, so there are many acts under which you have to take permission. The first was this Water Prevention Control Pollution Act 1974, under which you have to take permission from the State Pollution Control Board for any polluting activity. There is a list under which you take permission. So one is consent to establish, and second is consent to operate. So suppose I want to bring an industry in a particular area, then I have to take a first consent to establish, and then after I have the CTE solicitation, then I have to again apply for consent to operate. This is under Water Act. Okay. Later on, we had this Air Act as well, same structure, same thing, also for the air pollution. Then we had Protection. So if you see the evolution of the act, they happened as we realized the problem. So first we had this water pollution, which was very visible. Then we had air pollution. Then we have larger, problem beyond air and water. So, and one of the conditions in the Stockholm was that to bring an overarching law. So because Air and Water Act was only about the prescribed standards of the emission and discharging, what about the environment generally? So very hurriedly, and Bhopal gas strategy was one trigger where government wanted to show that and till today government wanted to show that we are doing something. So this EP Act was getting hurry with just one very small act, but it has so much wide power central government that central government can do anything under this act. It has overriding power over other laws. So any direction under EP Act, it should have overriding effect over all other laws. This is how it is supposed to be. And any rule, as with any other law, they have to go to the Parliament scrutiny. And because of these sections, there are many sections, so notification and rule, they have the same power as the law. And we have seen how these provisions are now misused today. But that time intention was actually protection of the environment. But now we are seeing that it is being used to relax the thing. Because central government has a lot of power, so it becomes very susceptible to the political regime. So an interesting part about the EP Act is that there is no institution mechanism in the Act itself. If you see any other Act, there is always some institution included in it. But on the EP Act, you can have one person authority. You have central government has so much power. Okay. And it can create as many authorities it wants. It can create as many, whatever they want. They can restrict industry activity. In fact, this eco-sensitive areas, no development zones, so these are all created under the CP Act. And even today, whenever there is some loophole in law, like for example, wildlife corridors, or even this recently green credit rules, which I will speak a little bit. So anything, any new law which government wants to bring, they bring under EV Act, because it is so powerful, act, the central government can do anything they want under this thing. But the good part is that there are so many different rules under it: biomedical waste rule, coastal erosion zone, EI notification itself is a big law, but it's actually a subordinate notification under this CP Act. E-waste rule, batteries rule, whatever rule, there are maybe 100 rules, I don't know. You just search and you will get so many rules. And this whole zones are under also EP Act. So this is the power of EP Act. This is the list of the clearances which we need under different provisions. And one thing I want to mention here is that the Trees Act and Forest Acts are very different. So under Forest Conservation Act, you need permission to de-reserve any forest in a notified forest or recognized forest from central government, but Trees Act are different. So maybe in an urban area, it's not forest, you may not need forest clearance, but maybe that tree or particular area is covered under Preservation Trees Act. So the authority is same, maybe the DFO, but Forest Department, but the acts are very different. And some places, some trees are not covered. Some places trees cutting is allowed, but planting is mandatory. So this is a very complicated law, but this you have to understand that Trees Act and Forest Act are different act, they are not same act. Now, very briefly about this environment clearances. So before 2006 we had 1994 notification, but now the present date is 2006 notification. This stage called scoping, where the expert appraisal committee, there is a committee which sits in the ministry, they prescribes what studies you need to carry out in EIA. The company do the EIA with the help of a consultant. The problem here is that the consultant is paid by the company which is doing the EIA report, so there is always conflict of interest. So usually we have seen the consultants don't submit a strong report. They usually copy paste, or they conceal data, they provide fake information, and there is like whole bad practices there. So whatever, the law says that after the EIA report, you have to present the draft EIA report for the public consultation. It has to be written as well as public hearing on the ground, and there is whole case laws on it. Which if I go, then it will be very long. Even there's one case on which I filed in 2014 against a project for Adani, and I won the case in 2016, where the court has said the entire process was tainted, and that case is quite cited by people in terms of the process of EIA, why Form 1 is important, why scoping is important, why public hearing is important. It has to be free and fair. It's not a public hearing, it has to be organized under the police presence or people with guns and everything. So it has to be free and fair public consultation. So every step has some safeguards, and you only have to follow each of the steps properly, then only EIA becomes proper. If you compromise at any stage, then your whole process becomes problematic. So after the final, they again go to the EAC for appraisal. And then appraisal, the important part is that the EAC can actually reject a project. But we have seen hardly any project being rejected. They all are granted. Okay. So a precaution principle, gone. So no one follows that. We all come down to the minimization and restoration, whatever. Category A are the bigger projects, which goes to the ministry, and category B are the smaller projects, which goes to the state level. So the process is similar, but there is some relaxation. B1 requires EIA, B2 does not require EIA in the category B project. Now we have seen during COVID time, lot of amendments have happened through notification, which is a bad in law. And we have seen pharma industry. I'm giving one example. Pharma industry, red category industry, it is one of the most polluting industry. So there are 2-3 amendments. One amendment was say that if you have just consent under Air Act, Water Act, then no need to go do the EIA report. One amendment through which happened during COVID is that they said category A, this pharma industry was treated as B2 or B1. I have to confirm, but it was treated as a B2 if you have to just submit the EMP. And during that time, many these projects were cleared. The question is that this EIA was not stopping any project. Okay, it was supposed to prescribe, and it became more like a restoration kind of thing, unfortunately. But that also the government tried to do away. And this is just one example. There are many examples systematically this EIA notification has been dismantled, a term I can use. There was an attempt to bring this EIA 2020 because after the protest they dropped the plan, but they brought most of the changes through OMs and many of these OMs are not in public. There's a Pravesh portal where this whole information are supposed to be put online, also because of the judicial interference. But again, we have seen that Pravesh portal sometimes it will not work. Some projects will deliberately be hidden, saying it is a public interest, national interest. Okay, so and there was one interesting thing where actually one RTI we filed, and the reply we got is that ministry cannot declare the information of the Nicobar project or some other project, I don't remember, but it was they said because the ministry is in fiduciary relationship with the project opponent. Now, how can a regulatory authority become a fiduciary relationship with the project opponent? It's an authority. It is supposed to deliberate the thing. It is not a trade secret. And even if there are certain things which are national interest, suppose you don't want to disclose your airfields or some army, whatever, but you can at least disclose data which is in public interest. There are ports coming up, commercial port. There are roads coming up. There are settlements coming up. I don't know how you can say these are in national interest or public interest, strategic importance. So there has been efforts from the central government and the other governments to hide information, and that is more problematic because first of all the laws are being diluted. Secondly, implementation is very poor. Thirdly, whatever transparency you had, remedies, you have to go to the court saying that this is not being done properly. They're also not doing properly. Okay, and everything time sensitive. So if you cause failure to comply, suppose the project comes and there is so much investment, the courts also take a call that there's so much investment happened, now we cannot stop the project. So this is a tragedy, and this is happening very common. And now these issues are so common that people don't make a noise. I remember 5-6 years ago, these issues used to be very catch attention, but now it is so common, like we are immune, they become somehow like normalize this kind of violations. Forest clearance again, you have to take permission from. So this here you have to understand, the forest clearance means that forest land is state subject always. It is a state which has to apply for the forest clearance to the center. So basically, suppose I am a person who has to take forest clearance, so I have to take permission of the state, and after that I have to take permission of the central government as well. Okay, so because forest is a concurrent list, and Forest Conservation Act was supposed to stop any ill-advised project or any bad project. But again, we have seen forest clearance also, it became more like a licensing kind of thing in very poor implementation. Very few projects has even stopped. I don't know which project, maybe 1 or 2 projects in the whole last 10-20 years. But if you ask me whether forest clearance has actually helped, stopping deforestation, so answer is very there's no single answer. Maybe some projects they have not applied for forest clearance, but we have seen violations here and there, and whatever projects come, they just clear it. So there's 2 stages, stage 1, stage 2. So there is a MOF has different offices, regional offices. So it's a smaller project, it goes to regional import committee, and if it is more than 40 hectares, it goes to the FSC at the ministry. Both are ministry, but that is a regional committee, and this is the central committee. And stage 1 means that in principle this clearance is given, and there's a thing called compulsory afforestation. That means whatever forest you are destroying, you have to restore similar number of trees in some other place. Now this was problematic because trees are not the indicator of forest. Forest means so many, much bigger than forest ecosystem. Forest is a habitat. Forest as a source of livelihood of people. And forest as a ecosystem services. So no one talks about them. So even that also, they have came with this compulsory afforestation program, which is a failure. We have not seen any CAMPA to be successful in achieving benefits as national forest or what, but there's a huge money involved, and there's an incentive to plant trees, and we have seen that CAMPA is causing more problem in the other areas than it was not before. So the stage 1 is basically when I get the clearance, I have to identify the land for compulsory afforestation. I have to deposit the money. I have to pay the net present value of the forest. I have to pay for the maintenance of the thing, and the state government will give a certificate that all these things are done. Then again I go to the ministry and I get the final clearance. That means in stage 1 I have met all the conditions which were given. Wildlife clearance, National Board of Wildlife is there. So basically anything you want to do in any sanctuary national park, you take permission National Board of Wildlife. Then the major problem which I believe is that the act doesn't allow any activity which is not beneficial of wildlife in a sanctuary, but that is not followed anywhere. So you have seen roads and everything coming within sanctuaries, but national parks and sanctuaries were supposed to be a sacrosanct area where this kind of activity should be not allowed. That is the main purpose of declaring National Board of Wildlife, this protected areas, sanctuary national park. But that is also being we have now seen denotification of sanctuaries. There are several sanctuaries being denotified in last few years. Some of them are very rich in endemic flora and fauna, all this thing. And yeah, NGT, they're you've all never been knowing about NGT, this I spoke about it. So basically NGT has 3 jurisdictions. Section 14 is all civil cases. Now NGT doesn't have a criminal jurisdiction, so NGT cannot send you in jail. So it can only decide on the civil cases. So basically first is that anything which affects environment, I can go to NGT and say environment right is affected, so I can go. But again, not all acts are covered. So it has to be, you have to show that it is under this act. So there is the EPA Act, Water Act, Air Act, all these things there. Forest Conservation Act is also there, but it is not, it doesn't cover Wildlife Protection Act and Indian Forest Act, but it covers every other act. That is Trees Act it doesn't cover. Trees Act and this Wildlife Protection Act it doesn't cover. It covers Biodiversity Act, it covers every other act. Other is this relief, award of relief compensation to the victims of pollution. That job NGT has to do, and this is the jurisdiction. Thirdly, you can appeal against any direction or order passed by the authorities under any of those laws. So for example, I can challenge the consent to establish or the environment clearance or the forest clearance to the NGT. But I cannot challenge wildlife clearance because wildlife clearance is granted under the Wildlife Protection Act, which doesn't come under NGT. Alright, so basically this is how it is. There has been several case laws, like Supreme Court has said the NGT can take suo motu cognizance. Okay, there are order which says that High Court cannot quash NGT's order. So this kind of things are always there. keep changing, but this is the basic what is in the law. Yeah, this is the acts which is covered in the GTA Act, and this is the things which you can, I think I'm running out of time. Now challenges, I will just finish after this. So as I mentioned during my talk also, environmental law in India is basically more reactionary and less proactive. So our laws are not that much progressive. So basically, if you see, they are most into talking about the controlling it. It's not preventing. We don't follow material hierarchy. This is the major problem in the lawmaking or even the implementation or whatever I would say. Capacity resource, very low interest of the political parties or government to invest in the capacity of the capacity. When it's capacity, it is about the regulators and the institutions which are responsible for implementing these laws or training of the people. If you see forest departments, pollution control boards, they are highly understaffed. Okay, and then all other problems come. I mean, there was so much capacity issues, so you don't. And there was like time when NGT was running with just 2 or 3 judges. Many of the laws need amendment, but we have seen the new changes are actually relaxing safeguards. They are not being strengthened. Generally seen as roadblock or additional cost to industry, and we have seen that even courts also having this kind of view. It keeps changing. So one judge will say something, next judge will say something. So there's no standard thing like that. Very sensitive to political regime. As I said that these environmental acts, they have too much power to central government, and that's why it becomes very sensitive. And there's a history of different government using environmental laws to harass people and harass state, central to state. All this thing history is there. So it's not that it is always that it is implemented in a good manner. Sometimes it is misused also to harass people and the state as well. The laws are not deterrent. If you see the pollution, the penalties or the whatever compensation, if you compare with the business laws, for example, I want to mention here, this we have cited in other places also. If you see SEBI Act, SEBI is this share market act, SEBI Act, or if you see the RERA Act, it clearly says that all the unlawful gains you have gained from the unlawful activity, 100% of it should be the part of the compensation. But if you see environmental laws, 5%, 10% of the thing. I have not taken permission, I have violated the law, but 5% of the cost as a compensation. Why? When SEBI and all this thing, these are for business act, you can have such a strong law. Environment which is affecting the larger public interest, why can't we at least prescribe the strong laws which are deterrent to the violators? Why can't we say that all the profit you have earned from any unlawful activity in violating environmental laws should be part of the compensation? We don't do that. So I think this is a major problem, and I don't know why it is like that. Grievance remedial, you all know, not exclusive to environment. Any welfare laws we see, maybe some exceptions are there, but mostly it is poor state, not only because of corruption can be some places, but also because of capacity, resources, and whatever political will or culture, whatever you can say. So there's not a single answer. There are many reasons, but things are improving, but not the way it should have improved properly. But it all depends on the independence of the institutions which are granting these grievances remedies and how active they are. If there are too much grievances, and also it is very difficult of course to dispose the matter. And we rely on the courts. Unfortunately, if you see most of the environmental movements, they talk about going through litigation. And one of the reasons that I love working at Vidhi is because I'm trying to do something to influence the lawmaking part of it. I'm trying to study how laws are made. You can of course it is not so easy, but at least we should try to understand how laws are made, where we can actually make some intervention in the lawmaking stage. When it goes to the parliamentary committees, when it goes to parliament, or when there are some public comments, of course we can say that they can dismiss everything. But even participating in those things are very important. Okay, so courts are there as a last resort. We should go to the court. That is something there, but we should always try to see the life cycle of a law. So we should definitely track the thing. I don't think I have time to discuss all these amendments, but I will say that most of the amendments are Regressive means they are not sending the law. Ultra-virus means which is against the mandate of the law or which is unconstitutional. Okay, so there are several provisions which are unconstitutional, which are against the mandate of the law. Okay, enough material we have written on it, so you can go through it. And you can, I will, next slide I will show you that this, so everything is available online. So, with this website you can go and download these reports. You can read it. They are very well researched, high quality research with proper citation, everything. Nothing opinion based, very much what the law should be, giving examples of domestic laws, international jurisprudence, everything. This report, Delivery Environment, is cited most of the time with how during COVID-19 the government has changed the laws to entitle the laws, so that is a degraded environment. So there are several very problematic, very concerning changes, and then by the way they have made it, by saying they are in public interest. But what is the public interest? Public interest has to be, you have to see what the EP Act says. Public interest has to be seen from the protection of environment, not the benefiting the companies. So it's so complicated. Like for a normal person, you have to read it, you have to understand, you have to have the idea of it. What do you think? There is a one report on this Jan Vishwas bill, which you can read. This comments on proposed amendment laws, and there is one discussion paper on we have submitted. Even we have some wildlife, the Wildlife Protection Act. We have now allowed trade of elephants for religious and other purpose. Wildlife Protection Act is such an act which never allowed for any other purpose other than special purpose. Special purpose is very well defined. Population management or venom collection, all these things were they already there. But first time we have seen that we have opened a Schedule 1 species for trade, and whole much written about it. I can go through it. FCA, Forest Conservation Act Amendment Bill, is one act which is very, very disastrous for the country. I think this is going to disrupt the way all the conservation efforts we have taken last whatever since we have the laws, and it is going to reverse those things. And one disclaimer: personally, I am one of the petitioners who challenged this thing in Supreme Court. Personally, this thing. The Green Hour we have started publishing. Green Hour is basically to track how Parliament is performing in the terms of environment. So we have published 4 such reports tracking each Parliament sessions. Very comprehensive. It's not pick and choose. It's going through each and every argument, each and every debate, each and every bills, each and every 0-hour questions. Everything is there. Very detailed. If you go through this report, free of cost, available online. This is the one start we did because we wanted to see how laws are being made in Parliament and which topics are there which are important they're discussing, and whether they're discussing the right points. We have seen elephant is this most discussed topic, but some states are talking more about culling the elephant. They are saying that you have to stop the elephant from this thing. So there are always flawed arguments, and these political arguments, we first document those kind of things. Then only we can somehow shape the public narrative, because I believe that the kind of country we are, such a large populous country, the laws reflect the political regime, and political regime reflects what the larger public wants. So maybe we can say we are constitutional democracy, but somehow the majority view takes precedence, and the most powerful corporates, they have their own interests, and they are more the people who influence the law. They do make it so. I think we need to do more in terms of public awareness, in terms of environmental law, how this affects you. And you can go through with his website. So my team is Climate Ecosystems team. There are 20 plus different teams in different areas, but you can just search about it and you can go through all our reports. So that's all from my side. Thank you, and I will close this. I hope I didn't exceed my time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. And we do have one question. Ma'am, should we go ahead with the question first and then we can have the remarks?
Yeah, sure.
Dipanita ji, please unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for that presentation, first of all. I just wanted to ask that in correlation to all of these missions that we have and the emphasis on use of renewable energy and carbon trading and all of these new interventions that are coming up. So I just wanted to explore the whole legal ambit of it and your views upon it, because as we've already been discussing, a lot of the times land use and the interest of the community is not kept centrally to such interventions. So legally, like what provisions would we have, if you could briefly tell us around the whole emissions and use of solar and kind of interventions, and how do they affect the communities from that standpoint? Thank you.
Shall we take 2-3 more questions and we answer, or just only one question?
We can take 2-3, sir. That's all right. If anybody else has a question, you can raise your hand and ask right now.
Someone
Anushanji,
also.
yes. Anushanji, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Debadityo sir. So my question was on what are the things which EPA or the recent laws direct the state governments to do as a part of uh, creating new laws or developing the legalities of the state with relation to environment, the forests, and with relation to the state pollution control boards, and what is the state's role and how is the state acting at present as the stakeholder? Because as we see, being myself a student of environmental sciences, as I have observed is that the lion's share of power stays with the central government. How can the state independently function, or how can it expand its area from the guidelines of the center? Yes,
Okay,
sir. This was my question.
fine. Okay, I think we have 2 questions, so let me answer these 2 questions. So first thing you said, how can we approach? It's very simple. So you have to just this is ideally how you should do. If something is affecting you, you have to just first send a presentation to the authorities responsible. There, it is affecting this way. Then you follow up using RTI, and you go to the court. You go to the High Court or Supreme Court, depending on whatever it is. But you have to be very specific. You ask a general question, so this is a general answer. But if it is affecting any particular right, so if it is under Forest Rights Act or uh, not following the Gram Sabha consent, because we have seen many cases where the Gram Sabha consents are fake, or sometimes they are not even taken. Sometimes they are most like fait accompli. So this case is also there. So you have to just identify the ethical forum and go follow it. And usually, practically, these cases go for long periods. So you need to really very patient and and I don't know. Depends on judges to judges also. What kind of one example I want to tell you here. One is that whether you are asking some activity to be stopped and whether you are asking for compensation. Okay. In some cases, most of cases I have seen that people start by saying that we don't want this project, but ultimately they come down to compensation. And this false hope is given that you will be compensated adequately, and then the compensation also, they don't receive the compensation. For example, this Environment Relief Fund, this report is also there. So all the compensation which is granted by NGT has to go to Environment Relief Fund. And when 2019 or 20, when I filed the RTI with the fund manager, which was United India Insurance Company Limited, and that I published in the report also, it's available online. So I was told that not a single money has been spent from that Environment Relief Fund. So the question I want to ask is whether we ever receive any compensation for any such thing. So and even if you get some compensation lower court, it goes to Supreme Court, it gets stuck there, and then So yeah, sorry to sound pessimistic, but there are some good stories as well where people have got good orders at least, but someone has to follow up. So that is one thing. About EPA Act, you act central government. So even if a concurrent list, the state's right no one can take away. For example, when you are saying this forest conservation bill recently jo aaya, it says that this project will not require forest clearance, we exempted everything. Even then, the state clearance is necessary. You have to take state's permission. If the state want, they cannot allow any particular thing to happen. Land is a state subject. Okay. When water is a state subject. So many cases, and even a central government prescribes a particular emission standard, the state pollution control board can actually prescribe strictest emission standards. Okay, so there is no cap on that. But the problem is that states actually want this kind of relaxations. So historically, if you see the states, very few, maybe except cases, but states actually want to do away with the environmental laws. And the reason it was brought to concurrent list was that states were not able to protect them properly. Okay, so this thing, but I think ideally the central laws and this concurrent list, anything, the central government makes the laws, and if there's conflict between state and central law, then the central government law will take precedent. It has to be followed. This is one thing, and that's why the central law has to be stricter. It has to be strict. This is one thing. Sometimes the central government, like for example, this recent this decriminalization of the Water Act, which was passed this year in the budget session or something before that. So it was implemented for 2 states, and baki usme it was written that if other states want to adopt this amendment, they can adopt it, but it was up to the state to adopt it or not. So these things are also there. Yeah. So these 2 concerns, and there is one also text question also there. What are opportunities to connect local bodies to bring environmental study or research to them, as distances to connect to them? So, yeah, it's a very difficult question, but the role is here, the civil society's role is more important here. Like, how much we are able to raise the awareness and make them improve their capacity. It is not like helping them, it is making them self-sufficient to do their work and making them building capacity and all everything. So this is where we need to do more work, and now we have internet and everything, and things are connected. So I think it is more about a capacity issue where we need to work more. Okay. Anything else? Any other question?
Yeah, actually, I would like to add upon my statement. This is something which I faced personally in West Bengal, in the particular district of Howrah. There was this cement power plant or cement plant which was trying to expand, and there was this normal procedure for the environmental clearance applied. But where I found it over there that the public gatherings and the public consultations didn't take place in proper manner. And as you said that um, the police should be just, and there shouldn't be firearms or such things which make people apprehensive about the gatherings. But it was exactly a gathering of that kind where neither the local environment activists were allowed to enter, and all sorts of administrative force was used. So what do people do in these situations? Because these are under the state, and
I
the
got
West
it.
Bengal Control Board,
I got it. So
WPCB
let
should
me answer
step in.
that to
Yeah.
you. So for any this kind of violation, so first you have to see what the law says. Okay. In the notification, it clearly says the public consultation has to be supervised by the SPCB and the DM. Okay. So district magistrate and the SPCB, they are responsible for ensuring that the public consultation is free and fair. Now, if you see this kind of things happening, you have to immediately submit a written complaint to the DM and the SPCB and demand that it was not free and fair, saying each and everything to create this document. Okay. Then you have to demand that we have to organize again the public hearing. So what happens is that when you make this kind of submissions, you take the effort to write it. Okay, you just cannot say कि नहीं हो रहा है. So, and there will be repercussion on you. Then when you go to the court later on, so it becomes a documented evidence that you wrote to them immediately. This is happening. They are not allowed to speak, and court take cognizance. It is not nothing like that. So usually what we see is that people just complain. They don't do anything. Okay, nahi, if you complain, then there will be repercussion on me. Arey bhai, ho to hoga, but someone has to take the call. Okay, so in my case, what happened was there was like people in civil dress with the guns, and in the public hearing video. So even there is one thing, the whole public hearing has to be video recorded, and video recording is also part of the appraisal process. No one sees it. So one thing is that there was like people in civil dress, everything. It was reported by local media, and when we asked for RTI for this public hearing video, it specifically denied to give us. We wrote to the many people, DM, they didn't give us. So from ministry we got the CD, DVD of the video recording. And video recording, we saw that, what is the situation basically. There were people with guns and everything. And they were like, video was not continuous. So video was cut like in some place, and there was like someone is saying something, someone's trying to interrupt, and the video just cut. And then there is a new person speaking. So, this kind of evidences you have to gather, and this you have to gather in what the law says according to that. Okay. Then you have a strong case saying the public hearing was not proper, not free and fair. There was also a thing called whether you have published the public hearing advertisement in a national newspaper and a local vernacular language newspaper. Where newspaper doesn't reach, you have to take drum beating and you have to go in vehicles, you have to post posters and everything. So, to start, you have to understand the law. You have to read it in notification, what the law says, how the public hearing has to be taken place. And they have to, more like question answer, you have to compare what is happening, there is evidence, you have to complain, and then you have to go through the proper legal route. Then things can follow. So, and there's time limit to it. It is not like after 1 year you will complain. So you have to complain within that 30, 40 days, 60 days when this appraisal is going to take place. You have to write to the ES appraisal committees when it is going for appraisal for the final clearance to the Ministry of Non-Forest. So then you have a strong case to challenge the public hearing. So these remedies are there. So you have to follow up. Yeah, I hope I answered you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Anybody else has a question for sir? All right. So there are no more open questions, I think. We'll just proceed to Bhargavi ma'am, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, thank you, Priyanka, and thank you, Debadityo. I think you did a excellent, giving everything in a capsule of the history and overview of the Environment Protection Act in India. And what is very important about the Environment Protection Act in India is it came after the world's worst environmental crime. I will not call it disaster because it was a crime, the Bhopal gas tragedy. Probably many of you were not even born at that point of time. And we got this environmental law only after that. And even before we could fathom what is in it, the EIA came only in 1990s. And by the time people could grapple what this whole thing was about, we had already started diluting it. And like Debadityo already mentioned, instead of strengthening the law at every stage, it has only been weakened. And some of the main components that have been taken away in these dilutions are areas of public participation, public involvement in environmental decision making. So we just heard both of you discuss about how public hearings are conducted, how EIAs are conducted, and how the EIA reports are not accessible to the local people, not in the local language. So these are ways in which you keep people out. You don't want any kind of resistance, right? So many of the public hearings that I have attended over the last 30 years has all been where, the pro-project people are allowed inside. They are allowed to make their voices heard, whereas the local communities are not heard. And also the kind of dilutions that came in the 2006 EIA dilution generally kept the project affected communities away, because it gave such humongous powers to the DC who was going to be conducting the public hearing. He could decide whether, people living in 5-kilometer radius or 10-kilometer radius could attend the public hearing. And people from cities could not attend based on where you gave your address from at the public hearing. So they made provisions to ensure that the genuine voices, the critical issues that might come up, basically any kind of criticism, any kind of information that people ask, they would be shunned. And this has been a way that the entire process of environmental decision making has happened in India. And the more recent dilutions also has, while a few parts have got strengthened, a large section of it remains diluted. And at the time of the dilution, like Debadityo already mentioned, it's like going through an examination. You go through the whole thing. It's so voluminous. You have to give your comments between 60 or a 90-day window. And then it's literally like preparing for an exam. And at the end of it, what happens? Is there any change that happens? Is there any major suggestion that has been incorporated? No. And who can even give these comments? It is people like you and I sitting here who can read and understand and fathom things. And maybe not even everybody of us, because for example, don't come from an environmental law background. I don't read law particularly. I come from a biological background. And so for somebody coming from sciences to understand and interpret law will take some time, right? So it has largely been made inaccessible to people. So it's like throwing googlies at you, and by the time you figure out what the googly is about, the project proponent has gone about getting a consent for operation, consent for establishment, and all kinds of no objection certificates from all the concerned agencies, and the projects move on. So it's about having the projects come about. Environment is definitely pushed to this side. And today, in the context of, we spoke about a variety of projects, both with Soumya's talk and Debadityo's talk. So we want that high GDP and a certain paradigm of growth where we are going to be blind to everything else. And this is coming at a huge cost of land. So the kind of land grabs that are happening, while environmental laws have got diluted, land laws also, we just discussed, have got diluted. The civil society in India played a huge role in strengthening the LAR Act since the 1894 Act. But today, every state has its own ways of, reforming the land-related laws, implementing projects in a variety of ways so that land is accessible to the project proponent. So land today is taken away by lease. It is direct purchase for the project proponents, or sometimes local communities are threatened and, the land is literally grabbed from them. So this is where, again, I would go back to the provisions in the 73rd and the 74th Amendment. So there is, it is time that everybody pushes for that to be implemented, because the district planning committees, as per the Article 243 ZD, where panchayats and municipalities can play a role, there is some hope there. And if only we could all understand these provisions, maybe we could push for strengthening the environmental laws, given the nature of climate change impacts we are seeing today. We cannot be allowing further dilutions. We cannot be allowing for habitats to be destroyed. We cannot be allowing for public health to be affected. We cannot be allowing for food security to be affected, because once land goes, it is food security and health. So over the coming weeks, we will be learning a lot more. But in the meantime, I've also put two very interesting reports in the chat box. One is called The Green Tapeism, that was written during the 2006 EIA dilutions. It's a very interesting read. Do go through it. And in that, there is something called the death certificate that was issued to the Ministry of Environment and Forest by groups who had come from across India to protest in Delhi against the dilutions. It was a 2-day event. One was called MOEF Suno. The other one was called MOEF Chalo. The day they wanted MOEF to listen to them, it was a public hearing conducted for an entire day of projects across the country, and nobody from MOEF turned up. So the next day, all the groups decided to go to MOEF office and, hold them accountable and answerable. But even there, they did not see any solution. And so they decided, a ministry that is not listening to us is as good as dead. And they gave a death certificate to the ministry. Of course, it was a lot of theater, but very interesting what the people of the country felt. And that probably triggered some kind of fresh thinking, because it was soon after that Jairam Ramesh became the environment minister. And after he became the environment minister, he went around the country conducting public hearings on the BT Brinjal issue and also the coastal regulation issue. So he conducted public hearings in 8 or 9 states. So I think movements like this does have an impact, and these will be very good reads. The second report that I have put in the chat box is about the evaluation of those projects that don't fall under the purview of the EIA. So what happens to those, and what kind of decisions are taken? What are they? How are they running? So we did a study of some 470 industries. We physically visited 10% of them, and we found that most of them did not have a CFE or a CFO. But they had managed to get all kinds of NOCs, and there was zero compliance after the projects had taken birth. So this will kind of give you an idea of how environmental governance is working in the country in the larger framework of law that you have learned today. And I think it was a great session listening to Debadityo and Soumya Dutta, who exposed us to the many things that's happening in the country. And so until next week, a lot of food for thought again and a lot of readings. And thank you so much. Over to you, Priyanka. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I'd like to thank Debadityo sir for being very patient with us today and for answering all of our questions. His presentation was also very thorough for all of our readers. He has mentioned a resource in the chat box for the participants, and ma'am has also mentioned. So please do go through the chat box and save these resources, or we'll also share with you over email. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us today. Really, and we look forward to having you in future IMPRI events as well. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being a patient listener.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
In light of the time being a little reduced, we are almost at our time now. Ma'am, we'd like to go ahead and with participants, if they have any more questions regarding any of the sessions, they can go ahead and ask. We have ma'am with us. And also regarding your abstracts as well, if you have anything to discuss, we'll be happy to answer. Neeraj ji has said, I don't see the readings or resources in the chat box that Ms. Rao referred to.
If you click on the link, it will take you there.
I'll just cross check, ma'am. Yeah, it's working, Neeraj ji. Just click on the link, it's working. Any other participant who has either has a question or wants to discuss something about their app, if they have an idea about their abstract, what they're going to write about, can discuss. Anushan ji, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I actually worked in the Sundarbans region for my BSc dissertation. So my topic was on the environmental economics of climate change in the present times, and I had focused on the cyclones. So I actually didn't publish it elsewhere apart from my university thesis. So I want to take apart from that dissertation itself and submit it as my abstract and the following essay. And but I would need some help from you because the pattern I had written was the university pattern of thesis, and I see that the pattern which is mentioned in the document is a bit different, and me not being a very experienced writer, so would need some help from you people. So may I know how I should contact you afterwards?
Anushan ji, you can just write your queries regarding the how your abstract and how you have to write to learning@impri@gmail.com. We'll
Okay.
further will convey it to Bhargavi ma'am, and ma'am can then see how it has to be done. Other than that, we have given the guideline document as well. So that's another thing. If you go through it and get a thorough read on that also, then you'll have all the formalities of how to write the research article further.
Also, Anushanji, regarding that abstract and your study, we would request you to send what idea you have in your mind regarding your dissertation that you're planning to pick up and further develop into the essay, so that ma'am can look into and she can give her due suggestions and comments how it can be improved or in what direction you need guidance. And regarding the style of the article, don't worry about that. We have provided you the guideline documents. In that, we follow APA style.
Yeah,
Also,
I
when
have
you
checked.
will be submitting the paper, we will help you guide on if there is any kind of, you're not able to figure out any citations, references, or the style. We'll help you at that stage as well. So we will request you to send the concept note, which will be the abstract,
Okay.
to get an idea of what you will be developing as a research paper.
So can I send a mail before 25th so that before 25th I am aware of what my abstract should be like, because I already have an abstract written.
Right.
So there will be some edits and compilation work going on. So can I do it prior to the 25th and get my work ahead?
Sure. That's not a problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Neeraj ji also has a question, but he's not able to unmute. In the meanwhile, Deepanita ji, you can go ahead if you want. Neeraj ji will be giving you permission shortly.
Yeah, hi. So I just had a question that it seems that what I want to develop is more around we'll be using secondary sources primarily. So in that, is there a preference for example, like having literature reviews specifically, or like a policy analysis or an article that has a mixture of, say, citation and also a little bit of opinion? So just wanted some guidance with how to proceed if the article or the essay is primarily based on secondary sources and not primary sources. Yeah.
Right. So that is up to the concept and idea that you will be sharing with us, right? So it can be it can be supported by your secondary resources as well. Also, the fact that reports are somewhere a primary source, so you can always inculcate them in your write-up and support the whatever idea that you're going forward with, right?
Okay, sure. So I'll just send the abstract and maybe it becomes more easy to guide after.
Yes.
If you want some directions regarding your abstract also, you can ask right now also about the topic selection and all also. Ma'am is here.
Yeah, so because I've primarily worked with rural communities who work around commons management, and I mean that was a thematic that we were looking at. So I wanted to develop an article or essay around the loss of traditional livelihoods, uh, and due to migration and a couple of other factors, and the loss of commons primarily. I do realize that that kind of literature around the commons itself, and I wanted to do it from a gender lens also, is a little bit limited. I mean, in my knowledge, the kind of literature that's available is a little bit limited. So that's why I said that if it could be a mix of, I mean, how to proceed if it's a mix of, say, mostly secondary literature, but also some excerpts. So that idea of my of having a practitioner's viewpoint around this topic. Yeah.
Can I respond? Yeah, I think that will be very interesting because that is what is really needed today from a practitioner's perspective. Given that most of these traditional livelihoods that are dependent on commons are actually, the net zero, almost net zero, I can say, because they are not connected to the grid. They emit very less, and they are completely locally sustainable, and they are kind of symbiotic with a whole lot of other livelihoods. But the fact that commons are being diverted to a variety of projects, and the loss of commons is resulting in the loss of these livelihoods. So again, it will take you back to what Abhi said, right? To solve one environmental problem, we are creating another. So we're pushing all these people to take up all kinds of odd jobs. And you also mentioned the gender lens. So that is another very interesting aspect, because while the men migrate out, women are stuck behind, and skill training for women is very, very limited. Most of the skill training again revolves around, those that reinforce gender, like beauty parlor training and tailoring and things like that only. Nothing beyond that, which will eventually push them into marriage and reinforce everything that we would want them to move away from and be independent, have agency, and all of that stuff, right? So I think it's a great topic. You may not find a lot of literature, because I think very few people have focused on it, but the last decade or so, there have been some who have focused and written on it. If you could explore, you could probably find something. And I would also say look at a lot of the civil society work, because it may not be completely published, but a lot of this knowledge is getting created in civil society spaces, in their reports and representations, and perhaps even some of the petitions to courts and things like that, where the commons, livelihoods, gender has been addressed. So I think it's a great topic to think about and write. Was that helpful?
Yes, great. Thank you. That gave me a lot of pointers. I'll look into those for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We also have Neerajji's question. Neerajji, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I don't have a specific question. Priyanka, for some reason, I have been facing some technical difficulties and I couldn't find those readings in my chat box. So just asking if they can also be emailed, because all I can see is the links to the Vidhi and the UNEP report in my chat. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right. We'll provide the links. Not an issue. Shabani Deji, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, so thank you so much for giving me opportunity to speak. And it was a wonderful experience to hear all of you. First of all, I'm quite new to this field. Actually, I'm doing diploma from ISGL in GGS, and while going through that diploma, actually, I explored this field and currently jumped into this field. So, I just want to have a slight help from you to regarding choosing a topic and how to navigate in writing abstract and all of this.
I guess you could broadly think of what was it that interested you and made you join this course. You could start thinking from there, because I'm sure there has been a lot of personal anecdotes where you've seen something, you've experienced something, and something about this whole environment policy and action. The title of the fellowship. And the word youth somewhere triggered some interest in you, right? So you should go back to that thinking and say, oh yes, this was what pushed me here. And from there on, I think, also listening to so many of these sessions will help you move towards a particular theme, and within the particular theme, you'll be able to think of a little more solid and concrete idea of what it is that you would like to address. You said you have a background, you're doing your diploma. So even whatever field your diploma is in, even from that angle, you could also look into it. You can feel free to write a detailed email and I'll be happy to respond to.
Okay, okay. I think that will be great. Yeah.
Grushama Pandya ji, would you like to ask? Or I can read from the chat box. They're saying that I'm focusing on marginalization of informal workers in current climate policies, need for more inclusive strategies. If possible, could you provide me with some readings for that?
Surely, I'll definitely think about what I can suggest and send it to Priyanka, and she could probably add it to the reading list that's already there. I think there's very little because most of the cities have, again, like I keep saying, the plans, the action plans when it comes to climate change have always been top down. There are very few which have gone ground up. So it's only now that a few groups in some cities are looking at all the truly vulnerable communities and having conversations with them. And so it's just beginning. While social impact work, there is a lot from the ground up. From a climate change perspective and environment perspective, there's very little that has started from those communities who are bearing the brunt of all of this. But definitely, if I find something, I'll be happy to share it with you.
This is for all the participants. Similarly, if you need any suggestions regarding the readings for your abstracts or any suggestion about your topic selection, you can just give a note and write to us an email. You can be as elaborate as you want or as brief as you want. We will convey it to ma'am, and then once she has replied, you'll receive that reply as well. So not to worry in that regards. We have Maria ji also. Maria Sargency, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. So my question is, first of all, I am a lawyer. I'm not very experienced in the environmental conservation field. I'm greatly interested in this field, is why I'm here. So I was thinking about, for my abstract, I was thinking about topics that I directly relate with. So I come from Kerala. Like in my last introduction, I mentioned I'm greatly interested in wetlands. So this is my direct experience. When I was a child in my young years, I used to see a lot of fishes, a lot of migratory birds in the farms around my house, which I don't see anymore, which made me so curious. So I started reading up more about it, and I understood that the place that I live is identified as a Ramsar site, and little more digging, I realized there's a saltwater barrier that was built 50 years back, which when it was built was for ensuring food security. But 50 years down the line, it acts against the farmers of the region, and the biodiversity is hugely affected. So I'm planning to look more into this topic, and I'm not sure if there's much academic research done on this. There's, of course, the people who raised the concerns when this was built, but I'm not sure if there's academic papers or so much of research that went into this. So I'm relying on talking to the farmers, talking to the people from the area, and then coming up with my research. I just wanted to confirm if this approach is okay, or what to keep in mind while doing this.
I think that would be great because, much of the research actually starts with people like you going and interviewing the affected community people, and writing a simple article also triggers a lot of interest. So today there is so much conversation on solar parks causing social impacts. It's all because somebody somewhere said, hey, there's something not working here, something not all right here. The fact that we are all talking about climate change because some naturalist at some point said that particular bee hasn't come, this bird hasn't come, what's happening, right? So that's a great way to start your research and getting to know more. And it's very interesting because you say wetlands and you talk about biodiversity. That also reminds me of the Miss Kerala fish that has reached the IUCN Red List. And for all you know, these wetlands could have been the great habitat for that Miss Kerala fish. I don't know if you know the story. It became very famous because somebody at some point caught it and showed it at an aquarium conference, and people found it very pretty, and suddenly it also got all the feng shui attention, and they said, oh, if you have this fish in your house, you'll become prosperous. So that fish was being extracted from all the rivers and streams of Kerala, that it eventually reached the IUCN Red List, and I think it is still on the IUCN Red List. So on one hand, you have, India signs up for CBD and you have your own internal biodiversity laws, but we forget to put systems in place to protect simple species like this, right? So I'm sure you'll have many of these kind of stories that the local people will be able to share, because they are the best sources of information. They are connected to nature on a day-to-day basis, right? While most of us who are reading, writing, are not there on the field. So I think it's a great idea, and it'll be a good chunk of work that you are planning to do.
Also, Maria ji, you can take pictures and videos as well. You can add it to your essay, the pictures that you're going to take, and you can present the video during the presentation time, right? This will help more to put forward the concern area as well.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do we have any more queries or questions about abstracts or anything in general? In the meanwhile, once again, please do start sending us your abstracts so that we can help you with the finalizing what the topics will be. There will be a there will be the fellowship components are abstract and presentation. And then if you wish to go ahead, it will then further proceed as a book chapter based on how the guidelines are followed and after the revisions are fully completed. So abstract and presentations but are a must. So start sending us your abstracts. Will help you with the finalizing the topics and refining your abstract as well. And then you can present it on the last day of the fellowship. So with regards that, now anybody else has a question? If not, then we'll be proceeding with the final remarks from ma'am and the vote of thanks after that. Okay. So no more hands are raised, ma'am. So any final remarks for the day?
And not much, but I think the fact that they're all thinking about their abstracts and planning what to do, taking cues from their own previous work and from their own regional experiences, I think is a great way to start. And all these sessions that they are listening to, I think, are also adding a lot more perspective and a deeper understanding of many of these things. So I'm really excited to be reading the abstracts now. And with that, I think wishing everybody a great weekend and a good week ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. All right. So anybody, if you have, please start sending us the abstracts once they're ready. And okay, Tanisha, all right. Yeah. So ma'am, we'll proceed with the formal vote of thanks then.
Okay.
So as we come to the end of the second day of EPAYF, Environment Policy and Action Youth Fellowship, an online international summer school program, a 2-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program, I, Priyanka Negi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for the Day 2 session, Mr. Soumya Dutta ji and Mr. Debadityo Sinha ji, for taking out their valuable time and allowing us to learn from this online certificate program. We thank our chair, Ms. Bhargavi S. Rao ji, for convening all the sessions. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you next Saturday on June 1st for our day 3 of the certification course. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join us in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.